Agenda items before. So we call to order tonight the Westborough Advisory Finance Committee meeting of October 4th, 2018 here in Memorial Hall in Westborough Town Hall. We'll review tonight's agenda. We are going to offer an open forum to open the meeting. Next, we'll review and approve minutes from October, is it 1st, 2018. Then we'll hear from the planning board and from our planning board chairman on planning and open space articles. That's Jim Robbins and Mark Silverberg. Next, there are a number of town articles the committee was interested in hearing more from, and we will hear from Assistant Town Manager Christy Williams and Finance Director Leah Talbot. Then the committee will continue with warrant articles as we finish our full review and position on this fall's warrant articles. Next, after that, we'll discuss draft agendas, and we'll get any final liaison reports, comments, or concerns from the committee members, and take a look at, make sure our future agendas are in order. So with that, we'll move to the agenda and review minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes of October 1st.
Do we have a second? Was there any comment or input on the minutes?
Yeah, the typo was that we were building a train instead of a trail, and I thought that we should correct it.
Thank you. Very good. And yep, I've also made a request that each revision of the minutes have a footer similar to what Mr. Wells has started to put that convention at the bottom of our documents so we know which version or draft of each of our documents we're reviewing. Okay, with no further, did we have a second?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, all in favor? Looks like a 9-0-0 vote to approve the minutes. Thank you. All right, next we are ready to hear more about our planning board, from the planning board on our open space articles. So with that, Mr. Silverberg, Mr. Robbins, can you direct us to the warrant article number and walk us through, give us some background?
You want the article number, okay, so I don't know.
I can, let me see if I can find it for you.
I can speak to it easier if you reference the subject matter and which one you want.
Let me see, I can find it, I'm gonna dig through here.
36?
We sorted them before, is
36
36 the
is
first
the-
one?
36 is what the presentation says.
All
Sure,
right.
yeah, and this would be the presentation for the town meeting. We can
That's good.
run
And let
through
me-
the whole presentation if you want, or we can go through.
What do you prefer? Do you prefer to take questions as they arise from the committee and I can recognize someone, or would you like to finish?
We've all read the article.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think if probably on this one, it'd be best certainly to have Jim get up and give us a synopsis.
Okay.
And then if you want him to take you through the whole presentation after that synopsis, or we can just take a Q&A and Jim and I can try and answer your questions. It really is, I mean, you're in charge. So.
All righty, why don't we hear your input. Please take note of your questions as we move through so the questions are clear, because I'd like for us to be able to make sure to make a record of the questions and answers in our minutes as we move forward. And just a reminder, Mark, we wanted to hear on another article, which was the property assessment up at Eli Whitney. Anybody remember that?
Right, there's
article?
there's some planning board articles, then there's an open space article, and I should introduce myself.
Yes, please.
So it's Mark Silverberg, I'm chairman of the planning board and also chairman of the open space committee.
Okay.
And so if you want on Article 36, I think we could have Jim give you a synopsis of that one. It's a little more technical than some of the other articles,
Okay.
in my opinion.
All right,
Is
let's
that
hear
all right,
about
Tim?
36 first then.
Thank you for having me again this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins.
I'm going to start out by actually moving to the map, because once I orient you to what we want to do, I think the explanation will be better. Okay. So can you see my cursor moving around here?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
You have a pointer I can try and
I don't have a pointer, but I think you can see the cursor. So this is the zoning map of the town. No, I can't see the cursor. There it is. Okay, and over on the left side, my left, your right, of the map, you have Otis Street. Now my cursor's disappearing. But on the purple area on the west side of town where Hockomock Pond is. You all know that area where the MBTA station is. Astra Pharmaceutical, Sasakis Drive, the Old Barbarian Farm, the Transit-Orient Village, and then up on the hill, Valenti Drive, which is accessible from Route 20, but goes into Westborough where the YMCA is. There are several vacant industrial lots up on the top of the hill. This article has specifically to deal with those areas and those parcels. There are several parcels that front on Fisher Street. And I'm going to show you those now. Okay, this is much better. Otis Street is running top to bottom, Route 9 across the top where it says BA. We're interested in the parcels that are colored purple and are numbered. So only the parcels that are numbered up there.
May I offer you a pointer?
Oh, great, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I don't know why my cursor is disappearing. Thank you, much better. Thank you so much.
Not all.
So just to orient you, Route 9 at the top, this is Otis Street. This is Astra Pharmaceutical right here.
Okay.
The MBTA station is down here where the M is. This is Hockomock Pond in the town property.
Would
Would you-
for him to do this on this?
On this one, sure. So Hockomock Pond right here, MBTA station, Otis Street, Smith Parkway, Gleason Street. Now over here, we're in Shrewsbury. Then up here on Valenti Drive, this is Valenti Drive, comes in from Route 20. The YMCA is right here, and there are 3 other industrial lots. So all the lots that are numbered on here are the subject of this zoning article. On the zoning map that I showed you previously, there's another area in town that's also zoned industrial. That's on the east side of town, Computer Drive, Research Drive, Freiburg Parkway, Technology Drive. That's where most of our office parks are. They currently enjoy a zoning that we call Industrial D, which, with a special permit, a developer can build beyond 4 stories up to 6 stories. Currently, you're allowed by right to build 1 to 4 stories in all industrial properties in town. So in all of the purple on this map, you can build up to 4 stories. Our proposal is to give the same privileges that we have on the east side of town, on Connector Drive, Research Drive, West Park Drive, to the west side of town in order to encourage further development, like the Astra Pharmaceutical site, and allow them to do the same as the east side, build up to 6 stories. The zoning article first intends to overlay these parcels that you see shown here with that privilege. We call that Industrial D. It's currently Industrial B only. Industrial D allows the increased height and the increased building footprint coverage. And we would change the rules and regulations such that a developer would no longer need to receive a special permit from the planning board, but could simply go through site plan approval. Most industrial projects, if you build 1 to 4 stories, only need site plan approval. They don't need a special permit. So what we're doing is we're allowing you to go from 4 to 6 stories also with a site plan approval.
Can I just ask one question? Remind me again where the new 6-story buildings would go?
Wherever you see a number on the parcels.
Anywhere in
So all of these numbers represent a map and a parcel number on the assessor's records. So any of these numbered parcels, we would be allowing an increase in building height and site plan review without a special permit.
And it's the west side of town?
Yep.
All around Hockomock Pond? Is that Hockomock Pond in the middle?
This is Hockomock Pond. This is town-owned property, not on the transit-oriented village area, not on the ward property. So this is the ward property. This is the transit-oriented village. These are residential properties, so obviously they're not involved. We also were careful to not allow it next to the residential property. So you see, these are not going to receive the overlay. These will still be restricted to 1 to 4 stories. Like right now, you have a building here that's called, that has Dana Films in it. The building's a 2-story building, but they have 4-story silos adjacent to the rail line. So we're trying to protect the residential properties in both the transit-oriented village area and the residential areas. But yes, Astra Pharmaceutical, which abuts one side of Hockomock Pond, would be allowed to go to 6 stories. And as a matter of fact, the pyramid currently is over 4 stories.
I don't know if we need, is there a lot, is this a good point to ask questions? Do you have more to say about this
I was
article?
going to give you the rest of the presentation, but I think you have enough facts without that. Go ahead,
Okay.
ask questions.
All right, other questions from the committee? I'm going to ask Beth first, I saw a hand first, and then Jim, and then Paul.
Do we know if the fire department has the equipment to take care of 6-story structures?
That was primary concern in the very beginning, yes.
Mr. Driscoll and Mr. Hugel.
I just noticed the planning board crossed out in a lot of places, Board of Selectmen put. Is there
Yes.
anything you can say about that that's
That's
overall?
because we would transfer the permitting requirement from special permit to site plan review. And
Okay.
currently, the Board of Selectmen does site plan review. During that process, during the site plan review process, they are required to receive comments from all the boards. So the planning board would do a thorough review and submit their comments.
Okay, thank you.
And then Mr. Driscoll, and then I'll come over to Mr. Bradley. Yep.
This makes it more attractive for commercial business.
Definitely.
What does that do to our traffic?
Well, probably the same thing it would if they had to do a special permit. The difference is time. So we had a developer come to us to reuse the Astor Pharmaceutical site, and we were competing with other communities. They ended up locating in Rhode Island. But one of the biggest issues they were concerned about was timing. Currently, our process would require a special permit, which takes anywhere from 3 to 4 months, and then a site plan review after that, which could take another 45 to 60 days. So you're looking at a 6-month period before they get their permits to apply for a building permit, and then a building permit, of course, on top of that.
Yes, Andrew.
So I guess you've started to allude to this, but you gave one example. I was wondering if you could talk to what sort of overall demand you think is driving this, or is it just that one example?
That's the most tangible example. I can't tell you, I've had another developer come to me on this side of town and say they want to build 6 stories. However, on the east side of town, we have a developer that's looking at one of the parcels on the top of West Park Drive, 800 and 1200 West Park Drive, who also already has this privilege. And one of the reasons they're looking at Westborough is because they can build higher than 4 stories.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got a couple of questions. The impacted roadways here are not on the map that's in front of me, so I just wanted to review them with you. It looks like,
You mean the names of the roads? Or not?
yeah, the names of the roads that are going to be impacted
So this
if
is-
we move to 6-story industrial
This
here.
is Otis Street,
Yeah,
okay?
Yep.
Route 9,
yep,
Smith Parkway.
yep.
And then you come down here and you have Fisher Street. But
Which
the
one's
impact would be on Otis Street and Smith Parkway, which are already built to industrial subdivision road standards.
Possibly Valenti Drive.
All right, so.
Oh, yes, Valenti Drive up on the top of Boston Gulf.
So I happen to live over there, so my radar's up, and I didn't know what you were doing here. So that, full disclosure, I live over there. Fisher Drive, or Fisher Park, is it Fisher past
Fisher Street?
Avalon? Fisher past Avalon or before
Fisher
Avalon?
is here.
Yep,
Yeah, Fisher's before it, well
This is
before
Otis
Avalon.
Street.
okay. It's still Fisher all the way down to Arch Street.
But it's not impacted.
Where is-
That's not the impacted area.
Fisher goes here.
Okay.
But Fisher,
Yeah. So I'm worried about traffic.
Mhm.
And when I drive into Westborough from the east side and look across the campus to those very tall 6-story buildings that are far away from the neighborhoods with their own major routes, I get a very different feeling than the in-town roads that my neighbors use every day. Sitting in traffic, waiting for people to get out of the commuter
Train
station
station.
already.
Yeah.
Without a traffic impact, I just can't even wrap my head around dozens of 6-story buildings on the east side right now. It's much more residential than the pieces on the west side that are already 6 stories.
Jordy, can I speak?
Sure, please.
We did consider traffic impacts. One of the points that was made in the public hearing was that when AstraZeneca was at full capacity, there were hundreds of cars going through many of these intersections. So in a way, the town's experienced that to some degree, although things have changed, obviously, and there's more traffic everywhere. We were concerned about the not Smith Parkway, Otis Street and Route 9 interchange, because that is a traffic nightmare, and it's a state responsibility to upgrade that. But the sentiment was that we'd rather have the businesses coming to town than going somewhere else. where they could be met with by right zoning that allows 6-story structures. The other factor we considered was that, many of these sites are already developed, so it's really would be redeveloped. And that's a really long-term process. I mean, we're not gonna see dozens of, we haven't seen any new buildings go in over there at all, over since the zoning was changed to what it is now. I mean, I can't think of one new building on that side of town. So what we're trying to do is give an impetus to get some more commercial development in our commercial zones. We're also looking at, about 6 or 7 years ago, we took away some of the rights of ownership. I don't want to say took away, but we changed the zoning that didn't allow any residential development in this zone except for the transit overlay. And, we're trying to give those landowners back some, I guess, I don't want to say value, but some flexibility in what they can market to a developer.
I understand from the commercial point of view. I'm just going to speak up for the residential point of view in that area and the quality of life in that area. It's not the same as what you see along Route 9 on the west side of town. It's different. It's a different site. I would love to see some kind of a rendering of what that looks like, filled out to 6 stories on each of those lots with an industrial building, and what the anticipated traffic is, not only on Route 9, not only on Otis, but along Smith Valley Parkway, which is already difficult to pass anytime there's a train coming into town. So I'm going to yield the rest of, I've got a personal stake in this, and I want the rest of the committee to listen with your own point of view. Yes, Paul?
Can you tell, you had public hearings, and can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
The planning board voted unanimously to support this. We had a bunch of businesses at the hearing, which were in support of this. There were some residents, but we didn't receive vehement concern for traffic. When Astra was there, they had 1,300 employees for 2 shifts. When I first came to work here, they were in full swing. They had duty police out there. I don't know if they used Fisher or Arch as cut-throughs. To be honest with you, I don't know that they did that.
Yes, Mr. Driscoll, then Mr. Roush, then Mr. Bradley, and Mr. Wells. Yes.
I have a concern too, because I live on Arch Street, and I can tell you that Astra employees did use Arch Street, because I followed one of them into the parking lot and kind of gave him a few words for how fast he was going down Arch Street.
Mr. Roush?
Jim, if I understand correctly, there's a bridge down there by parcel number 19-96-0. There's a Fisher Street Bridge that's out.
Oh, it's been out for years, it's been out for 25
It's
years.
been out for years. I mean,
Mhm.
if that bridge were to be rebuilt, that would make Fisher Street a major thoroughfare for that.
There's no plan to rebuild it. The railroad or Mass DOT would have to rebuild it.
Okay, so it belongs to either Mass DOT or the railroad, and yeah,
Correct.
they're kind of unlikely to do anything. Okay.
The reason it's out is because a train hit it. I don't think they're likely to rebuild it.
No, I mean, it's out because it's not structurally sound, right?
Right, because a train hit it.
And Brad, did you have a?
I did, if I may.
Bradley?
So you alluded to the fact that there's a number of structures on these already, so
Yes.
there's an impact in some of these lots that would go from 0 spaces to 6-story buildings potentially. But there's also an impact for some that'll go from 3 or 4 stories with the opportunity to expand.
Right.
Could you give us a lay of the land as to what is already out there so we can get a sense of what the delta really looks like? Or is there a way you can render it, if not on this map, then in some sort of a description that will give us?
Okay, to the best of my ability. Coca-Cola is back down over here. I don't know if you're familiar with Coca-Cola, but they're down here. They do shipping. DHL delivery is here currently. This is Columbia Tech, and they do manufacturing. They have several hundred employees there right now. Let's see. This is the Astra Pharmaceutical. We're all familiar with that. This is the former Bavarian Farm. Going up on the hill, this is the YMCA right here. This is the back of the car dealer that fronts on Route 9, so that would be Herb Chambers Honda. This is a vacant parcel. And by the way, there's no connection to the bottom of the hill, it's all out to Route 20. So all the traffic from any development here would exit onto Route 20 in Northborough. They would not be coming this way. This parcel is currently occupied by Selectron, former Selectron. It's used by a new company, Norco.
Well,
There-
Necco's candy and Norco is cardboard.
That is, that's the Crafts Company, and they're no longer there. It used to be, good grief.
Wasn't it
It's a
Rand?
paper company, Rand Whitney. It was Rand Whitney, yeah.
wasn't
So
it
that
Rand
parcel
Whitney?
is right now used by light manufacturing and trucking. You probably see mostly trucks, it's warehouse right now. This is Quirk Tire. This is the MBTA train station. This is what used to be Winter Frozen Foods. This is the company I was telling you about earlier, Dana Films. And behind it, there's a construction yard currently.
And I suppose I was trying to get a sense of the buildings that are in there and where you think the opportunity is for change. Because this is
Sure.
a conversation of a change, but not all of it is a change from 0 to 6.
Right. So when you look at these parcels and you can see the property lines, you can't imagine that they're going to have 100% coverage. So there are significant wetlands down here. You see the stream that runs to Hockomock Pond. Most of these parcels are wet. They're not going to be developed much beyond what they already have now. The other thing is that there's a requirement for open space and parking. And so for a lab, for example, you have to have 3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. So for every 1,000 square foot of building, you have to pave an area for not only the parking, but the aisles for turnaround and the entry and the driveway. So the whole area isn't going to be covered by building because you have to have adequate parking to serve that building. And you still have to leave 40% open space if it's built to 6 stories, or 60% open space if it's built to 4 stories.
I know he has a question. Did you want him
Gary,
to go
did you have
first?
a question?
Yeah. Currently, this is zoned for 0 to 4, right?
Currently,
Currently zoned
Yes.
4. If somebody came in, like, and wanted to redevelop the Astra property, and they came to the town and said, we want to go to 6, we need to we need to modify the building, renovate the building, and have 6 stories. What would prohibit us from giving them, on an individual basis, a special permit to do that?
that's spot zoning, then it's not allowed.
It's allowed in the east side of, if you go back to the map.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Couple of things
on the
that-
east side of town,
okay,
it's all,
so if you look at the east industrial, you could do that in the east side.
On this side, you can
with a
already do
special
that.
permit, but we don't have authority now to go beyond 4 stories. They would have to get a variance, and they'd be hard pressed to prove economic hardship for a variance. It should be noted that in the east side, we've had this ability to grant a special permit for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, at least 5 years,
at
probably
least,
6
and
years.
We've had no buildings built, so we're talking about a very slow process. If we get 2 projects in at once, I'd be shocked. So, again, I'm not trying to downplay the impact, but we are trying to encourage some commercial development and give some more flexibility.
Beth, did you have another question?
Yeah, I have
And then I'll come back.
2 questions. One is, I believe it's the Economic Development Council weighed in and said that this is a good thing. Okay, so your head's nodding since people can't
Yes.
necessarily hear if they're listening. And then the other question is, this seems like it's more proactive to just kind of get uniform policies throughout town and get the 2 sides of town to match in similar areas rather than make them have different feels.
So a little bit of history. We decided to overlay only one portion of the town, the eastern portion, in the beginning, 5, 6 years ago. And our hope was that that would encourage additional development, particularly in the parcels that are circled in red up there. There's a red circle up there. Those are the properties that we overlaid with zoning 2 town meetings ago called 43D, which is expedited permitting. It's the same zoning that we had at the state hospital, which means permits have to be granted in 180 days, all permits within 180 days. We got no takers, okay? And they have the same zoning that we're proposing now for the west side of town. However, we had a company that wanted to do 6 stories at the Astra property and could not, because they didn't have the same privilege that we granted to the east side of town. And since we felt that Route 9 is the major carrier, it would be equal good access for someone on the west side of town. It would improve the property's value to our tax base if we did this type of zoning on the west side of town.
Gary, you had a follow-up before you left,
Well,
and then
yeah,
I'll come down to
I
Jim
mean, I was
Driscoll.
kind of going back to the east side, west side. If we already have, you know, the overlay on the east side with special permitting, but the east side is still limited to 4 stories unless we issue a special permit, is that correct?
No, the whole section is going to change. So in any industrial deed district, site plan review only.
And Jim, you had a question?
The pyramid, how tall is that? How many stories?
It's 60 feet tall, which today would qualify for in excess of 4 stories. Because modern technology, you have to have a lot of, the plenum between stories is almost 10 feet now. So we used to think of a story as 10 feet, but now you need 10 feet plus, so that you can get in all of your computer equipment, the HVAC, and all your telephone and internet wires. It gets very hot, so you need a lot of airspace.
So the pyramid qualified under the 4 stories?
The pyramid is a 4-story building, yes.
Thanks.
The pyramid would not be buildable under current zoning, if that's what you're asking. The pyramid was built prior to current zoning that limited it to 45 feet.
Okay.
So you couldn't build the pyramid now.
And, yes, Andrew?
Has there been any of this, amidst any of this conversation, has there been a discussion about possible commercial benefit to the town?
That's where this all started.
Absolutely.
There
But
was-
any
That's what this
estimates?
is
I mean, yes, it's been talked about, but has anybody estimated anything? Is there a benchmark?
Yeah, the assessor did a benchmark for that, and I don't have it with me, I apologize. I
Okay,
didn't anticipate that question, it's an excellent question. So you've given me some ideas for town meeting.
thank you. Could you forward that information to us
Sure.
prior to that? That'd be appreciated.
Yeah, Mr. Silver, yep.
I mean, I know traffic is a concern, and I'm concerned about it too, and everybody I hear from the town is concerned about it, but we were also cognizant of the fact that the train station is right in close proximity to all of these
Will you point to the train
sites.
station again for everyone?
And, you know, there's a multi-use path going through there that we're hoping will be appealing to developers. We all forget that the train station can bring employees to town as well as, you know, it's a
Without
two-way
cars.
train. So, you know, we're hopeful that the proximity to the train station
Train station.
will alleviate some of the, you know, again, I understand that some of these intersections are overused, but.
And Smith
we
Bell
need to
Parkway
put
is
pressure on it.
impassable every time a train comes into town, and the train station already, the parking lot at the train station is already over capacity. So there's several problems to solve before we increase the number of industrial
We also have
sites
a
there.
shuttle that we call the Westborough shuttle, I know you're familiar with it.
Sure,
It's very successful during the morning commute, it's not successful during the day.
bet, yeah.
So I think one of the things that Mark is trying to say, if I can double check this is anticipating people coming in on the train without cars and then walking to work.
Again, we're expecting that if somebody develops a business here, that they're not gonna, their entire employee base is not gonna be just from Westborough, it's gonna be from other towns, and people from Boston might come out on the train and walk to work, or.
And at least half of those people will be driving. I mean, you can go into any office building within, you know, the distance of a train and find out what percentage of the employees drive and what. So I get it, yeah.
My answer to that is, you know, what comes first, the development or the traffic improvements and intersection improvements? And
Yep, I hear
I
you.
recognize that we need to put,
Mhm.
you know, pressure upon our legislature to improve the Smith, I mean, I keep saying Smith Park, but the Otis Street, Route 9 intersection needs improvements, so the same way Lyman just is in the
Yeah.
process of.
You know, and I first
But
want, yeah.
Are we
Mhm.
gonna wait for that in order to encourage commercial development, or are we gonna encourage the commercial development?
Yeah.
And force the state to do something about these intersections?
And you know what, the first thing I want to do is apologize that I didn't have my head wrapped around this before tonight, so I've really got to start thinking about it. But commercial development is one thing, and appropriate sensitive development is another thing that maintains the sort of the character and the tradition of the town. So there's a balance between commercially driven decision-making and appropriate development. So I've got a lot of thinking to do, and I apologize for,
And if you want us to come back, if you want to, again, it's at your pleasure how much you want to go through tonight, or
yeah,
if you want to
I
do
won't.
some.
I'll let the rest of the committee ask anything else they want to first, yep. Anyone else? And you've got more ground to cover. Thank you, it's very interesting. Oh, Paul, did you have one more?
Just, you
Yep.
know, and I don't live there, so it's easy for me to say, but
Yep.
I don't know how many trains come through, but every time I
10?
stop at that light, I wonder, why do we have a light for 3 trains that come through a day? Because there's heavy traffic for 5 minutes.
I
on
believe as
over.
a former commuter, it's 10 trains now.
Okay.
Mm,
But I'm talking about the heavy
Yeah.
ones in the afternoon. Yeah, there's probably
There's
5.
specifically 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon type thing, and a few throughout the day.
That's exactly right. It's 3 in the morning, there's 2 around noon, 1 at 11, 1 around 2, and then there's 3 in the evening.
I've taken the train and I've run to my car and done everything else, but I also noticed that I was foolish running because the traffic emptied out.
And
just
if you go at
as
the
a
wrong
little
time,
bit more
if you go during
information-
midday, there's nowhere to park. There's no parking spaces.
Those-
I wish the light wasn't on all the time. It was
The,
silly.
the traffic light was provided by the developer of Westborough Village in anticipation of the commuter rail. The planning board made them as mitigation, improve that intersection through widening, and then install the traffic light. And so I would expect that there would be other traffic mitigation for any development that was significant, like a 6-story building that had something along the magnitude of the Astra Pharmaceutical at its peak.
Could you
Another
bring,
thing
yeah,
that was done by that developer that did Westborough Village is they realigned the intersection of Mill with Fisher and Maynard with Fisher.
and if you could offer any renderings of 6-story buildings sitting on those kinds of parcels, I think that would be helpful to the voters to understand what we're laying the groundwork
I
for.
think,
if we
though,
approve
to be
this.
honest with you, those would be misleading because
Yeah,
the buildings have different purposes.
right. I was
Like
going
a-
to say that maybe what AstraZeneca's pyramid looks like
Yeah.
and what a 6-story version next to it might be, just to give the scale of height.
Okay, all right, sorry, I was not prepared, and,
we can
but I
definitely
appreciate,
come
and I
back
appreciate
and
the
try.
work you're doing on that. Okay.
These are all questions we're coming here.
Okay, okay, all right, and next, that was 36, then we have 37.
Okay, can you just remind me of the subject matter on 37?
Sure, let me go forward. 37 is amend zoning bylaws. This is section 2520 of the planning board to see if the town will vote to amend bylaws. Article 2, district regulations, section 2520, changing non-conforming lot dimensions by adding the following new language at the end of the section.
But you're not going to have a presentation on that.
Okay, so this,
This is the M1
you want to take it?
zoning.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll be happy.
Okay, I mean, it's,
I
okay, so this,
something completely different.
this article was partially
Article 37.
Oh, I
a
thought you-
concept
okay.
put forth by the Spur House Committee, where currently in M1 zoning, we have to go to town meeting to make any changes, to a municipally owned lot. And this would give the ZBA the ability to grant a variance for certain things, not for use. They wouldn't be able to change the use. They'd be able to grant a variance for certain things on municipally owned property to enable the town to have a quicker movement on any municipal changes. We've seen this come into play at the country club when they wanted to put a deck on and enlarge the deck. We had to wait till town meeting, and then town meeting approved a building envelope. Same thing is happening at the Spur House, where I guess they are actually going for a variance if this passes. The other example would be the Hastings School went through the entire construction process and then found out that they had a mechanical room that didn't fit in the envelope. They would have been able to go to ZBA for a variance. Instead, they have to come back to town meeting for a minor change to the building envelope that, really seems to be better served to be done immediately rather than waiting for a biannual meeting. The other thing that the planning board liked about this, the way this was phrased, is that it gives abutters notice. Whereas at town meeting, everybody gets notice. In theory, there's nothing sent directly to an abutting parcel. And in ZBA would send something to abutting parcels if the town wanted a variance on municipal land, so that the abutters would actually receive a notice instead of just having to rely on, town meeting postings.
Yes, Hank?
The warrant talks, the regulation talks about changing non-conforming lot dimensions. But we're changing dimensions on any lot.
Just
I mean, by definition, an M1 lot is different than any other lot. So, I mean, we're not changing dimensions on just non-conforming lots, we're changing dimensions, we're changing the requirements on any municipally owned lot.
Yeah.
So, on what we're doing is we're enabling any municipally owned lot, somebody, I can't tell who, can go to the ZBA and get, I guess, since it's a municipally owned lot, it would have to be selectmen going to the ZBA because they own the property, right?
That sounds right, yep.
Well, the
Could be
Conservation
Concom.
Commission owns property also, right?
Yeah, it's hard to
I
envision
mean,
a
there's
reason
more than
where they-
one
yeah.
municipal,
I don't think
entity.
Concom owns any developed property, but I guess they do own
but they own, I
vacant
mean,
lots, right.
it's not just the selectmen who have control over M1 lots. There are other folks who have control over M1 lots.
Yeah.
And anybody who has control over an M1 lot can go to the ZBA to get a variance.
And so,
Am I missing something, Jim? Yeah?
Yeah, so you mentioned, and this is a very good point, and this is actually why the article came about. So, for example, the Conservation Commission, you mentioned the Conservation Commission, they have care and custody of municipal property. Their mission, though, would not allow them to get a variance for a structure, because they only control land that's permanently open in its natural state. This is for an addition or new construction. And so, as Mark said earlier, currently, if you live next to a municipal property and the town proposes something, your only recourse to oppose or support the action is at town meeting with all your fellow voters. There's no public hearing, okay, for that, because if only the dimensional standards get a public hearing at the planning board. The action, and by the way, we can't deny it to go to town meeting. All we can do is, does it meet zoning? So you're going to see 2 municipal projects on your zoning warrant, and the only reason one of them is under the name of the planning board is it's all about establishing the dimensional regulations, no other reason. If this proposal goes to the zoning board of appeals and you live next to a municipally owned property, you'll get a certified letter to go to the zoning board of appeals. That gives you standing under the zoning act. So you have the right that your neighbor who lives down the street or on the other side of the town does not have to speak for or against the proposal. And the zoning board of appeals must give that testimony weight.
Yeah.
Whereas town meeting, you don't have that privilege.
And keep in mind, we did not include use in this, so the town could not change the use of the golf course without town meeting approval, right? I mean,
And
that,
state legislature.
they could change the use of a school or that would still require town meeting approval. It's just, if somebody needed to put an addition onto a municipal building, they could go to ZBA and not have to wait for town meeting.
Sean, did you have a question?
Sure, and typically with these municipal articles, there's 2 components. There's the zoning, and there's the ask for the money, right?
Right.
So the money still goes to town meeting.
Great point, yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a great point.
So is there a scenario that anybody can paint that would be problematic? I mean, the zoning board of appeals would have to notify abutters, and would be the town trying to fix a non-conforming lot and change some lot lines.
Well, it's only on municipally owned property.
Right.
Right,
But it's going to affect an abutter, and all of the abutters will be
If I
notified.
understand correctly, that right becomes transferable to a new owner.
No, because a new owner would have to change the
Let's
zoning.
just pick on the Spur House for a minute, because that's a simple example. That's what prompted it in the beginning. if we change the zoning, if the ZBA grants a variance on a spur house for parking or setbacks or anything like that, that is transferable to a new owner.
No, because it would no longer be in an M1 municipal zone. It would be in a residential zone or whatever zone
So,
it would fall in.
so it wouldn't have any impact on the sale of the spur house.
Yep.
No.
Well, again, that's an important point, right? I mean, if that's what's prompting it, and it's not a transferable right, then it's an interesting thing to do, but it changes the
Well,
perspective.
when you say it's prompting it, it came up in the discussions of
Yeah.
the Spur
Yeah.
House, but it was seen as a beneficial change for the benefit of all M1
Right, but again,
municipally owned
if-
parcels. It
if the
wasn't
lot,
just seen
if
by,
the municipality sells the lot, you lose the right. It's not a transferable right.
it's not, because it wouldn't be an M1 zone anymore.
Okay,
Okay. And,
I'm okay.
Yeah.
I
All right,
understand.
and Mr. Robbins, did you have an
Yeah,
answer, or was that the point?
I want to be clear
Sorry.
on that. So when you say a transferable right, so let's use the Spur House just so you understand the scenario. So the Spur House, they wish to change the property line.
Yep.
Because they need to take the transformer off the property, the parking lot off the property, and give the parking lot to the municipal
Mhm.
building, right? So that renders that parcel non-conforming under our zoning bylaw. Currently, the only way that could be done is through town meeting vote, right? It's M1 zone, dimensional regulations, town meeting vote. If the town could do that through the zoning board of appeals, the lot would be created. So the zoning board of appeals could grant the change of the lot line by creating a non-conforming lot. That's a variance. That variance then makes the new lot, whatever it is,
Legal.
a legal lot.
Okay, because it's
Okay.
existing non-conforming.
Correct. But it's legally non-conforming.
I understand. I'm just
So
trying
now
to get
this
my
is
arms
very,
around
but this
that.
is very important
So
because
it's a transferable, it ends up being a transferable right in that sense.
that's correct. It goes with the property.
Yep.
And this is very important because lenders will not lend on a piece of property that has a zoning violation.
Yep.
Right? So now the variance cures the zoning violation and it increases the pool of potential buyers.
And when that kind of a decision would go before the zoning board of appeals, who would be notified? What abutters?
All the abutters.
All up and down the
within
whole of
300
Park Street
feet.
there?
Within
Yeah.
300 feet of the property line.
Okay,
So it's abutters and abutters to abutters.
okay. Andrew, did you have a question? Or Beth?
did.
It was Beth,
Yeah.
I knew there was one over here.
Sorry. So with the Spur House, okay, I'm on the Spur House committee, and this is part of the fuzzy stuff for me, so I'm not going to lie. Because we've been working really hard, but we still have a proposal to go in front of the zoning board of appeals. Did the Spur House have a solution that's not this, because this doesn't exist yet?
right.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Right. Just keep in mind that the planning board, while we were presented with the Spur House as an example, the way Jim just used it as an example, we didn't vote for this because we wanted to benefit one specific municipally owned
It
parcel.
seemed
Right,
like
we
it'd be
see
easier.
this as a beneficial change for all M1 zoning, to give the town more flexibility, more immediacy, and greater control over our own property.
Gary?
Maybe to add a little bit of clarity to this is the next article, Article 38, which really deals with the Hastings School project.
Okay.
And during the, before we started the Hastings School project, we came to town meeting with an article to establish
The envelope.
establish zoning to be able to work on and create the new pre-K wing. During the process, the architects and the architects and the determined that the building that houses the utility for the heat pump, the new heat pump equipment won't fit in the existing building.
Right.
So it's gonna require that one little closet of a building for the heat pump system has to get enlarged. Well, if we enlarge, we could have enlarged it like 2 feet and been inside of the zoning, but it's gotta be 3 feet. So now, we've had to come back with Article 38 to amend the zoning setbacks that were established originally, so that we can actually go ahead and be able to do the repair work to the heat pump system. Under if Article 37 was to pass and become in place, if an issue like this occurred in the future with any one of the schools or any one of the other municipal buildings in town, we wouldn't have to come back to town meeting, wait every 6 months to do it, and could go to the ZBA and just outline the deficiency to the ZBA and get a variance on it.
Okay, did you have any more to add to Article 38?
I don't.
Because he just
Yeah, I
reviewed
mean, I
for
think
us, which is
Article 38 is as much a school department article as it
great, as it
is,
is yours.
Yes,
But they're
as it
connected.
is
But
a
it's the
planning board
reflection
article.
on the
But,
envelopes.
Gary's exactly right. It's,
Mhm.
in my mind, it's almost, I don't know what the word is, but it's clerical
Yeah.
in nature, because, I believe personally that we would have voted for the envelope the way it's being proposed now. We would have allowed the extra mechanical room, and yet we have to go back to town meeting now
Okay.
for really a technicality.
And Beth, did you have an additional question?
That was part of it, no?
Okay. Any other questions on 37 or 38? The other one we wanted to ask you about is input on Article 23, which was the Eli Whitney appraisal. Do you have, and I think this was sponsored by, was it Board of Selectmen?
Yeah, the Board of Selectmen has asked the town to appropriate from free cash, I believe is the source, and, $25,000. That's a round number. We don't know how much an appraisal would be. The assessor proposed that number because he's had experience with tax appellate appraisals on obviously different properties. Now, this is a 63-acre parcel on Eli Whitney Street that has been for sale for several years. The price has not come down. The Board of Selectmen and the Open Space Committee believe it would be a beneficial parcel for the town to acquire for a number of reasons, but we want to get an idea of what it's worth before we go any further on it.
Great.
And so we're asking the town, for a round number, and then once we've determined the cost of the appraisal, there'll be a difference there that can go back into whatever the source was.
Okay, yes, Andrew.
On that point, is 25,000 going to be enough? We're sure of it?
Oh, yeah, I would hope so. No, I think it's going to be way more than enough.
Okay.
You have some expertise in this area, so.
Well,
Yeah.
not commercial appraisals, but we've had an appraisal done on another parcel, and it was less than that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I had a question. As exploring this as potential open space, the cost to the town might not be to the taxpayers, but to the Open Space Trust Fund. Is that worth consider? Is that,
Well,
if we-
there's a couple of questions. If you're asking where the 25,000 should come from,
Oh, well,
you could theoretically take that from open space fund instead
Oh,
of free cash.
right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking as we move forward, considering this parcel,
Well, if
so
we-
the town knows what
Again,
we might
without
be
knowing what it's
preparing
worth, but if we did acquire it, we would presumably use some open space money. We would probably, again, I'm not on the Walkup Robinson Committee, but there's quite a bit of money in there.
Okay.
The town could put together money that's already been appropriated.
Okay.
Whether it would be enough to buy it, I don't know until we get the appraisal done and
Right.
if they don't bring their price down, we may never buy it.
So, yeah, and that isn't a question, that's just background for what we're trying to prepare ourselves for and what we're data gathering for.
Right.
Paul?
And also, so
Yep.
is it both sides of the street or just the opposite of the school?
It's opposite of the school. It's abutting,
Yeah, no,
where,
Yeah, I just
I think
didn't
it's
know if it
Valley,
the Eli Whitney house.
Valley Brook and Bayard Lane. And then I think the other
It's
side.
it's not
abuts-
adjacent to Fail School.
Right, it's not that property.
It's-
Is that
it-
the
it
same
does-
owner?
In no way, shape, or form supports any work at Fail School.
No, it's not. It's more,
It's an open
the
space.
town envisions a connection of almost 200 plus acres of open space some of which
But
we
again,
already
I
own.
mean,
Yeah.
the conversation here is about, is it worth spending should we vote to get an appraisal? We're not having a conversation about whether or not to buy it.
Right,
That's a
This is-
separate conversation that,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
and we can't have an intelligent and informed conversation about whether or not to buy it until we have some understanding of what the value is.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Yep. Anything else? Thank you, gentlemen, very much. That's
I
very
did have
helpful.
something else really about
Sure,
the non-binding
yep.
question. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
weigh in
Yeah.
on that, or if you're. if you
Oh,
want some-
yes,
yeah.
there, you know what, we do need to hear about the potential non-binding
Okay, I'll get
article.
Jim
And
to
is
pull
that
it
going
up.
to show up as an
Is it a
article?
potential article? Is it, I mean.
It's not an
It's a
article, it's going to be a
non-binding.
non-binding question. I don't know if you, if
The
you remember
clicker
last.
question.
Has the town moderator agreed to
Yes.
put it forward?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah,
I did, and I should have, I did get a note from the town moderator that he was in the loop, and I'm sorry I didn't forward it to the committee. Does this appear then on the town warrant, or is this just
No,
presented
not on
during
the
town
warrant.
meeting?
No,
Okay.
it's more
I don't know
like
if
the
you rem-
clicker question.
I don't know if you remember at the last meeting, we had a question about
Electric rates.
electric
For burying
rates.
electric wires.
You remember at the beginning of the meeting that the town manager got up and just did an informal, non-binding
Okay,
poll, and it's going to be we're not going to do a huge presentation. We're not proposing any specific zoning changes. We're just asking if the town wants us to continue incorporating affordable housing requirements. And if you remember, we've come with, the planning board's come with a few.
Yep.
We put affordable housing into the D-POD with a minimum of 20%. We put affordable housing into the gateway, into highway business, where none of those had minimum affordable housing. And we just want to know if the town wants us to continue that in other fashion. And I can get more into the benefits. We're planning on just a quick, here are the pros, here are the cons. The pros being that we maintain our 10% affordable minimum, and we're in a healthy state right now, we're at 14%. But you have to keep in mind that almost 500 units are not held as affordable units in perpetuity. So granted, some of those expire in 30 years, but we need to prepare for that, because it doesn't seem like 40B is going away, and we want to take control of our affordable housing for the long-term future as well as the short-term. So that's one pro. Another pro would be we're seeing a lot of pressure to develop 2-3 lot subdivisions where an existing house is chopped up, and these little cul-de-sacs are, in my opinion, a drain on resources from the town, both the DPW, the schools, the tax revenue that we receive from a 4-lot subdivision is, in my opinion, nowhere near what the cost of the town is to, and you talk about traffic and overcrowding. If we see that trend continue, we're going to, see a lot of these little, cul-de-sacs off of main roads that will, I think, exacerbate what we talked about as far as traffic and school overcrowding. And then some of the cons might be, well, if you do build a subdivision, everyone's going to know who the affordable is, and there might be a stigma associated with that. And I would argue differently. I personally like diversity in neighborhoods, but again, I'm trying to just present pros and cons. The other con that did come up would be whether it would impact property values, and I think the answer to that is any zoning change can have an impact on property values.
Beth, you had a comment or a
Do
question?
you want us, as the Advisory Finance Committee, to express an opinion, or to leave this really open to the town meeting voters?
I think I'm leaving it up to you, I think it could be a fiscal, it could have a fiscal impact on the town, whether we don't or do approve or continue that, or, I think you all have a good idea of where this town's financial state is and whether we can handle that continued, development of these little subdivisions or not. So it's really up to you if you want to express an opinion on it or not.
So this is a pretty complicated issue that you're putting before the town. I think it's a really important one. I'll let Paul go first, though. I'll let the other members comment
I
before I
just
do.
Because we're not really getting into, we're just saying, allowing you to bring techniques, or encouraging, I guess, to bring techniques for, I can't imagine why anybody would say no to that.
Right.
So that's the only thing.
I think no matter what, we're still gonna have to propose a specific zoning change,
Right.
Go through the public hearing
So,
process.
because we don't know what
bring
those
it back to
techniques
town
are,
meeting.
why would we say
So,
no? Yeah, bring them forward, we'll kick them out later.
Well, yeah, I would have preferred to come with a specific article, but I think this is a good way for us to get a sense of what the town,
Yeah.
part of what drives this is that we have a lot of public hearings, and a lot of times they're very sparsely attended, and we'd like to get a sense of the town's wishes before we spend a lot of time bringing forth a specific article, and then having it picked apart at town meeting because we didn't anticipate.
So the only thing I would, Andrew, do you want to go first?
No, by all means.
The only thing I would recommend is when this needs some clarity and context before the town meeting weighs in, meaning what is Chapter 40B? When did Westborough start getting involved? How is the Westborough Housing Partnership involved? I know since 1975, we've been a community that has embraced our responsibility to keep a somewhat economically diverse community by maintaining that 10%. And our reward for that is that we have not had what is technically an unfriendly or an unplanned
thought we
40B,
did have
except for
one.
when we drop below 10%. So
Judy,
the importance of jealously guarding and protecting our 10% quota, I think, is really important for the community to understand.
I guess my answer to that would be, I'll be happy to do it, but I think the town moderator
Time.
won't allow more than a couple of minutes.
Okay.
So we may have to just talk to him about whether we have too much to deal with this, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
I
a
mean,
complex question.
It is a complex question, and, you know, any zoning article will be a complex article.
Historically, the town moderator correctly has said that when presenters step up, they need to focus on presenting information that deals with the specific issue being brought to the town meeting. The specific issue is whether the town meeting wants the planning board to make recommendations, not whether we want affordable housing. So I would recommend to you, please keep your commentary not on whether we want affordable housing. That's not the question you're asking. The question you're asking is, do we want the planning board to come forward with proposals in support of affordable housing? Let's stay focused on that, rather, because the affordable housing issue is going to just tie you up in knots.
Your authority, then you're saying focus on the planning board's authority.
If this was a warrant article item, we would ask you to focus on talking about the warrant article item you're presenting.
Right. I think that's great advice. We'll just focus on the fact that, do you want us to keep bringing these affordable housing
Want us to keep bringing
zoning
proposals
revisions
forward,
or
and,
not?
you know, and yes or no, and,
Okay.
excuse me.
Andrew?
No,
Yep.
I guess I would see the value of a non-binding question like this really dependent upon whether or not the yes or no has an impact on what's going to go forward. If people vote no on this, for whatever reason, and there's every incentive to say yes, how does that change what you're going to do? And I don't think it does, because as
Let them answer.
complex as
Yeah.
these issues
Yeah.
are,
So why are you asking?
they still have to be brought forward. They will be brought forward regardless. So
If I have anything to say about it, they will, yeah. I would,
so I think we have
even
to.
if the
as a
town votes no, I'm probably, you know, and again, I would have suggested that we present a specific article, but we're
Which we
trying to
would be
get a
doing
sense.
anyways, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I guess I don't see what happens, I don't see what changes the course of anything if people vote no on this,
But the-
although they will.
Can I just interject?
Yeah,
The dialogue
absolutely.
the dialogue that is raised from town meeting have to engage the question has, in my mind, some value. That's just my opinion.
Well, I would agree with that. I
Okay.
mean, we're
Right.
trying to get talking points out there that these are big issues for us as a board, but we're not really hearing from the constituency on this stuff.
And one more comment,
Yeah,
Beth?
I think one of the important points that you mentioned tonight that I'd like to hear you, say out loud publicly is that some of the current affordable housing will not stay affordable, and therefore we need to replenish it. Because that's something that you just kind of said in passing, but that's huge, because our 10% can change drastically as it ages out in one lump.
Yeah, I mean, if you take any one, I think Avalon is 120 units, and that alone is,
2024,
yeah, I mean, I think,
it comes off.
yeah, that alone though is like represent, if you think about it, it's 120 units that aren't affordable, but it's also 120 that become market rate. So it's almost like double dipping on the percentage. So it almost represents 2% right there on a swing. So we're not that safe at 14%. So
Yeah, that's what I think you
yeah.
need to convey to vote, just like introducing the idea, you know,
Yeah, you've got it.
you got it.
Okay, all right.
If you can
I'll
find a
try and do
magic,
better
if you
then.
can find a magic, way to
Maybe I'll
magically,
get
a way to magically model the math that moves in and out.
Maybe I'll get somebody to do the article that isn't quite so I tend to get sidetracked on
No,
stuff.
but I
I'll
mean,
just
but
focus.
that's the trick for us, is working with the housing partnership and the planning board and, you know, and understanding the impact to the town if we don't manage that inventory well. And it's a moving target. Anyway, it's an important, I feel like it's an important thing for the community to consider.
So again, I'll leave it up to you if you want to weigh in on it at town meeting or not, and we'll let you know if for some reason it's not.
All right,
You
I'll
know,
take
town
recommendations from the town about, or from the committee about whether they want to weigh in or if they just want town meeting to handle it.
Okay.
Do you take floor debate at town meeting on this, or do you just ask the
I
question?
don't think we're going to do floor debates.
No, I
and
think
Tom
it's-
may
he
or may
It's
not.
supposed
presents
to be
in
a
a clip.
non-binding poll. It's not supposed to incur floor debate.
Yeah, I don't think Tom may
And
or.
so can the
It's
advisory?
not a warrant article item.
No,
So that
it's
we don't vote
it's
on it either.
mostly a clicker test,
Okay. I think
essentially a clicker test.
I think it's important for the community to engage in this.
Okay. Any other issues on any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
All right.
If I may just remind them that they've
Yep,
committed
one
to
more
sending,
question.
oh, not a
Yeah.
question, they've
Yeah.
committed to sending us some information about the proposed commercial impact for Article 37. I just want to remind them
Okay.
as they bring us it up.
Okay.
And I'd imagine they'd send them to you.
There are some numbers on the commercial impact of the
On the
zoning
Astro
change out.
side.
On the Astor side,
The
yeah.
Astor side only.
Okay.
Yeah, we should see
the
them.
assessor to make some similar,
Yeah.
I don't know if he can do that
Forecast.
quickly, but.
If you're going to have to represent it, we'd love to see it so
Yeah.
we can consider it in advance,
I
if
think the
that's all right.
committee will want to look at it. Look at those numbers. Could you get them to us so we can consider them and vote on next Tuesday? That's
I'll ask John.
Give us the best you have.
our last meeting before town meeting is next Tuesday.
We'll check with the town assessor
Okay.
and see whether we can get some numbers on multiple parcels and not just one.
Thank you.
You know
Your
what, I
last
had-
meeting is
I had-
next Tuesday, the day after
Well-
Columbus Day?
Yeah. So I have one question.
I don't know what you're gonna
What
get.
is the minimum number of parcels that you could do this to without calling it spot zoning?
That's a good question, because it's the Attorney General that makes that determination. So you cannot improve the value of
One person's.
one person's property against the value of someone else that doesn't have the same privilege.
Yeah, I
So-
would really, I mean, that's a, take under consideration. What's the minimum change to avoid spot zoning? Anyway, it's just another question to consider. All right, we need to.
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
just to make a point.
yeah,
Tuesday is our last meeting to finish our work
review, yeah.
to get to get the reports and recommendations book done. We still have a Thursday meeting scheduled.
Okay,
We don't have to do a recommendation for the book.
okay,
We can leave that open and just simply state that we're gonna make a recommendation
on the town
at
meeting.
town meeting floor. So if we weren't able to have the planning board back with the information requested
Mhm.
by the 9th, it could happen as late as the 11th to give us time to consider that prior to town meeting.
The 11th, it might show up in the book then as a 000 from the AFC, and when, if we,
assessor says.
Shows up as Finance Committee will make a recommendation on town meeting
on
floor.
town meeting floor, if we don't have the data for the Tuesday night meeting.
let's see what the
So we don't even take a vote.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much, and thank you, Christy and Leah, for your patience. We are at 8:10 now, instead of 7:30, and we had a list of articles for our assistant town manager and our finance director to respond to, and we've asked them to answer questions to the committee for Article 1, 13, 25, 26, 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. So we'll walk through, do you want to just take them from the top, or did you
Maybe
have a
run through.
presentation order ready,
No, we can
Christine?
just take it from the top.
Okay. All right, the committee wanted more input on Article number 1,
Okay.
and that is non-union compensation study funding, and this was put forward by the Assistant Town Manager. And who had questions on Article number 1? Beth, yes.
Hi, so my questions were a couple that I sent you by email.
Yep.
Number of people for each position, if you've got a lovely little chart. Were there any positions that were significantly impacted? Jim Malloy mentioned that yours was.
Yes.
And the long-term impact of catching these positions up, because it seemed like the rest of the funds to catch people up was going to be folded into the budget,
Right.
and we'd never see it in an outstanding way.
Sure. Yep. That's so. The 38,000 will bring about 35 employees into their pay grade that was created as a result of the study. That means that it's retro back to July 1st, and that means that no one this year would be getting a step. So everyone's just going to get, for FY19, everyone's just going to move into the pay grades that have been established from the study. So if we were to fund the study completely with the steps included, and steps we receive on our anniversary, so that would mean that some people would, people would get steps throughout the year. So if we went back to July 1st and allowed for all the steps for FY19, it would be about $86,000. For next year, the full cost so that's for about 35 of the employees, because not all of the employees would be receiving an increase retro back. And then for next year, the cost of just the implementation of the study would be about $165,000 for 50 employees.
For how many?
50, so it's 50 non-union positions that were part of the study. And that would be before any COLA. So if we were to add a 2% increase on July 1st, then the total cost would be $225,000 approximately. That's what we've typically that's what our non-union staff receives, an average of what our union staff receives, and it's most recently been about 2% on July 1st.
Any other questions from the committee? Beth? Yep.
Were there any people who were paid way above their pay grade? And how was that dealt with?
So we
Those-
are not, I'm going to have to look.
On personnel, well, I guess, yeah, I'll let
I
you
don't want to
answer.
know the person, I just want to know if there was anybody who was way out of whack.
We had, I think, a couple people who were maybe within their range. Certainly anyone that is currently paid more than that pay range would just be grandfathered at this point, and this
That's
would
what the
come back
question
in like a future hire for that position.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. The next one was Article 13. And Article 13 is ADA compliance at recreation areas. This was a conservation and recreation article.
Yes.
Who had questions on Article 13?
Was this the parking?
Yes. So,
Page 13.
This was seeking dedicated handicap parking spaces and paved areas with access to Bowman Conservation, Rogers Field, Hadley Field, and Upper Haskell. Just so you know, because you weren't here, Derek came in to explain that they had moved ahead and tried to make this compliant by adding a paved path and one van-accessible handicap parking space at each of these fields. Members of the committee wondered if it would be more prudent to explore adding a second one at each field if in the future we needed another one. So that discussion was opened up. And then how does this tie into the assessment you're going to be doing in the future anyway?
sure. So I'll back up. I'll answer your second question
Okay.
first. So the assessment that we're going to be doing is going to be looking at all of these areas as well as all of the town buildings. It's a self-evaluation as well as a transition plan. So the transition plan would really be the consultant going through and giving us, sort of the projects that we need to do to become compliant. And that is certainly something that we would expect to fund over the years, depending on the size of the project, through operating budgets or capital plan. these are areas that the consultant would absolutely be looking at, and I would still have them look at these areas even after these changes were implemented. Our thought at this point is that they do need this accessible spaces and the accessibility of the paths, and so it's just sort of one less project that we would expect to be told we have to do on our transition plan. I know that I talked to Derek a little bit about his plan, and so he is proposing 2 paved handicap spaces for the Hadley Field and Upper Haskell Field, both the van spaces, and then 1 at Rogers Field and 1 at Bowman. As far as compliance with ADA, it's all based on number of parking spaces. So they're not striped parking lots, but it's sort of an estimate of how many cars can fit in that area is how Derek kind of figured out how many we should provide there.
So, okay, go ahead, Beth.
When he was talking to us, he kind of said it slightly differently. He said,
Okay.
since they're not striped, there's no rules. Whereas, as opposed to saying, it's really messy to see how many cars are there.
Okay, so maybe he came back and looked at this after. So with 1 to 25 spaces, which he felt that Bowman Conservation Area would be within that range, only 1 handicap space is required.
Okay.
And that can be a regular handicap space or a van accessible one, and this one would be a van accessible one. At the Hadley Field and Upper Haskell Field, where the 2 van spaces are proposed, so 2 spaces is required for 26 to 50 parking spaces. So assuming that 50 cars can fit in there, it's just 2 spaces that are proposed.
So 26 to 50 cars require 2 spaces.
Require 2 spaces, 1 being a handicapped van space.
So is it just 1 for 25 scaled up?
Right, so some of them, depending on how large your parking lot gets, you might require additional handicap spaces, but only 1 of them has to be van accessible. Or if you get into really large parking lots, maybe 2 of them have to be van accessible.
Okay, so the situation we are here is we approved the article as requested for the 1 space per field, and it was 2 at, there were 2 fields at
Sure.
Hadley Haskell, so it was 2.
Yep.
Do you have any sense on whether we'd have to come back and add additional spaces there if we had a clearer count of
Cars?
cars?
So in talking to Derek about this, it sounded like we would be all set with the Hadley Field and Upper Haskell Fields.
Okay.
It's hard to say. I know he's still pursuing a quote to add the additional space.
Yeah, but the quote is adding the additional space. My question is, are we ever going to really need to
we
add
need
the
it?
additional
Yeah.
space, or are we in compliance? So his first decision was.
Bowman will
adequate.
not, I mean, you could not even put 25 cars in
Right.
Bowman.
Right, so then
So
the
Bowman
1
only
space
needs
is
1.
adequate.
Yeah.
And
So
the
is,
third
are
location?
any of them,
The other one?
What's the other third
Rogers
location?
Field.
so, and Rogers potentially would be over 25 cars and might need a second one?
Quite possibly.
Yeah, I think Derek felt that potentially it could need a second one.
So we're down to, if the issue is compliance and whether we have to spend more money later, we're down to 1 field that would potentially need an additional space for compliance, and that's at Rogers.
Right. My understanding is that the majority of the money that this article is requesting is really for the paths, making the paths to the
Right.
pavilions and the playgrounds accessible.
The reason that I think I was the one who originally brought this up was that once you have all the equipment there, building a second parking spot while we're there seems a lot cheaper than coming back and doing it later when we find out we're short, 10 feet by 6 feet of paving.
Sure.
And so that was the reason for asking, what is the incremental cost, and maybe planning that in, especially if now we have a rule that, okay, 25 cars, but Rogers has a lot of capacity,
Mm-hmm.
so it could have more than 25 cars,
Right.
and therefore need the second spot.
Right, and that's why Derek is looking into
Is
the
looking-
cost to just add that
Okay.
while they're there.
And, Sean, you're okay? Right. So, and he said he'd try and get us that, but at this point, we've approved it as asked.
Right.
So I don't know what it would cost if it was prudent to add a second space at Rogers, and that's what we have to know. And I don't know how you'd amend the motion
Well,
on
we
the town meeting
amended on
floor
the
to do
floor,
that.
because it said, or such.
Paul, did you have a
We
comment?
did just comment again, I think it was today, maybe last night, that he hasn't been able to get that quote.
Right.
So if we get it, it'll be next week. And I have a feeling when we get it, it's gonna be not just on that Rogers
Yeah,
field.
and it's going to be
not gonna- it's not
4
gonna have a-
spaces instead of 1
It's not
space.
gonna be the answer, so.
Right.
If Derek chooses to amend the motion on the town meeting floor, we as the finance committee have the right to revote on the town meeting floor.
Okay. But it sounds like we've narrowed the issue of compliance with ADA to, so that we don't have to go back and redo work at a more, which would be more expensive. We've narrowed it to Rogers in order for
And one
compliance.
space.
And 1 space. All right, does that make sense? Do you want to talk to Derek about that?
But I can also follow up with
Yep.
Derek. I wasn't able to connect with him today.
Okay.
And then also with DPW to see if they can be helpful, since he hasn't been able to get that.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Christie.
Sure.
The next one, after 13, is 25. And 25 is rescinding excess debt authorization for, and this is 25 and 26 bundled. Can you talk to us about the 2 articles? One, Article 25, which rescinds excess debt authorization, and Article 26, which it looks like a transfer to Forbes Municipal Building, increased debt authorization.
Right, so it's not actually a transfer, but that's
Okay.
the intent, is to show that we, town meeting had approved a borrowing authorization for the fire station. But there's still 500,000 remaining that has not been borrowed, but that the town has the authorization to borrow. So we're rescinding that 500,000, the authorization to borrow from the fire station, because we don't anticipate needing it for the fire station, but then increasing our authorization to borrow for the Forbes Municipal Building, because we do anticipate
That
needing
gotcha.
that.
Okay. And who had questions?
Just make a statement or question, I guess. So does this have any long-term borrowing impact on the rates? Because since you haven't borrowed it yet, you get the rate you get when you actually borrow it.
It has nothing to do with that. It's just almost like a good faith showing, hey, we did really well on this one, and this one needs some shoring up, so it would have no impact at all.
Yes, Paul?
Is the second one, Article 26, the amount just because it was 500,000, or is that kind of based on something from the ground up? You know, it seems suspicious that it happens to, not suspicious, but coincidental that
contingency?
it's the same amount.
Well, it was certainly intentional
Right.
that we were taking the same amount that we had been authorized to borrow from the fire station, rescinding it from that project and putting that same amount into the Forbes Municipal Building. Like Leah said, it's a sort of a good faith. It's also the Municipal Building Committee and Jim Malloy, when he was here, anticipated that 500,000 would get us through the project, the Forbes Municipal project.
Do we have another question? We have, yes, Andrew.
Is there anything after the 500,000 is rescinded from, in Article 25, is there anything left in that account? Or are we essentially wiping it to zero?
Yeah, there's a de minimis amount of money, but
Okay,
we didn't borrow 500,000, so.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Ms. Blumberg?
So is this essentially creating the contingency so that if something comes up, you don't have to come back for nickels and dimes for the Forbes Municipal project?
So there is a contingency in place, but there's also just an awareness that we would need more money, just based on what we're doing. Is that what your question is? I mean, do we need the money right this second?
Well, so the contingency that was built into the original bid has been consumed, and we're not even halfway through the project. So you're halfway through the project, you've consumed the entire 100% contingency. The likelihood is that you're going to discover some more things that you hadn't
Exactly.
anticipated,
Right.
and you need to have the flexibility to move. You can't tell the contractor to stop working for 6 months while we wait for a town
No.
meeting.
No.
You need to have some contingency available.
So this
Right.
becomes,
And you have to trust the municipal building committee that they won't spend the money if they don't need to
Absolutely.
accomplish the result. All we're doing is authorizing them to deal with up to $500,000 worth of unanticipated spending.
thank you. Any other comments or
I
questions?
mean,
Yes,
is it
Paul?
appropriate for us to know what those, or at least for the town meeting, for them to know what those things are that are above budget?
Well,
in
I
a
mean,
general sense?
That would be the municipal building committee, and I don't, have you worked on a municipal building committee?
If you'd like to have the municipal building committee get into that at town meeting, you can, but it's gonna be very detailed. We
You think it?
But that's
we went to dig a hole in front of the building, and we opened up, we took the pavement up, and we put a backhoe in there, and we dug down, and lo and behold, we discovered that somebody 50 years ago dumped fill in there that didn't belong.
But do you think, so it's probably an accumulation of a lot of things as opposed to one thing?
We went to remove the bleachers and discovered things that we hadn't expected to be there. I mean, it's just a whole.
An open well, yeah.
I mean, the building was built, I think, in 1928, so there
Right.
was a whole bunch of surprises in the building.
A good example is probably the stage.
Yeah,
When
right.
they lifted the stage, they found out that there was concrete and steel
Right.
that needed to, that was
Right.
not in the original plans.
Okay.
No
I-
one knew that those things were there.
I think for presentation at town meeting, that having a list of the unanticipated things that came up during building ready might be prudent.
So George Brett and Dexter Boyce are going to present at town meeting, but I will certainly pass that message along to them.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, anything else on 25 and 26? Then we move to number 30. And this is, Article 30 is the town sewer system amendment, to see if the town will vote to appropriate 1.2 million to pay for the additional cost for the repair, replacement, and upgrade of the Banyan and Cumberland sewer pump stations, which shall be expended in addition to the 2 million previously appropriated from the sewer retained earnings for this purpose, to determine whether this amount shall be raised by transfer from available funds, borrowing, or otherwise provided, or to take any action thereon. Committee members, did you want to say a few words first, or do you want to just take questions?
I can speak first if you want.
Sure, yeah, please. Leah
So-
Talbert, Financial Director, thank you.
So when this article was put together, it was before we certified our free cash and our retained earnings. So, and I am one to never show my hand. Gary can attest to that.
Okay.
I may know what the number is, but I'm not going to tell you until Department of Revenue certifies it.
Okay.
So that's the reason why that particular article had the wording for perhaps borrowed, perhaps retained earnings.
Okay,
And once I was certified, then I said to Jim and Christie, you know, we can certainly do the retained earnings without the borrow.
so it's going to be retained earnings?
So it's
Okay.
definitely a retained earnings.
And that's how the motion.
And that is
Okay.
how the motion is written as well.
Okay,
So that's.
the new motion that you shared, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
I sent out motions on
Yeah.
all right.
Tuesday.
So the question was, how does that affect sewer rates?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
So what?
How will,
So the question, that sort of came out of this one, since you need more money than originally anticipated, is how does this impact sewer rates going forward?
So retained earnings is basically kind of like stabilization. So the money's already there, and so it doesn't affect the rates at all going forward.
But aren't we going to need to do more of these?
So I've spoken with Carl.
Sorry.
And obviously he's talked with you all about this, and I'm not the engineer, but from what I understand, Cumberland Farms sewer pump station is absolute worst. And going forward, he's hoping to do a couple of these, one or two of these every couple years. And so therefore, our sewer enterprise fund, I believe, is able to handle that. Our sewer enterprise fund right now has $3 million in it for retained earnings. We average using about $1 million every year, and we still keep replenishing it and coming back with the $3 to $4 million. We're in a very enviable position, actually, with these two enterprise funds, to be perfectly honest. Our guidelines say that we can have 5% for retained earnings, and basically we have 50% to retained earnings. So it's a very healthy fund, and we keep replenishing it. So going forward, Carl and I have spoke. I've kept the town manager involved, John Walden involved, and I think that going forward, we've always been able to use the sewer retained earnings and the water retained earnings to do all of the small capital projects, all the small recurring articles for when they need a van or something like that. Those small ones have always come out of the retained earnings. We've been very lucky to have that happen so that we don't have to constantly go back to the ratepayer and say, oh, we need to raise you another percent, another 2%, another 3%. So the retained earnings is, in my opinion, very healthy at this point. So therefore, that's why I was recommending the 1.2 to add to the 2 million that we had already transferred from retained earnings to cover the cost of this project.
That's really helpful to know, and a good message to the community, whether you present or Carl presents, that that the town hall and our acting town manager have a handle on what projects are coming, what they're going to cost, whether they can be absorbed in the retained earnings fund,
Right.
just to give folks
Right.
like us a
Well, we
level of
also-
comfort.
Right, and we
Yeah.
also look forward just to bump ahead to the other two articles that are
Okay.
borrowing articles.
31 and
just to kinda
32?
grab
Yes.
them all, because
Okay.
that's what we're talking about. I'm assuming not expected to defend the actual use of the money. I'm
No,
just here
it's the source.
for the
It's
financing,
the source.
the
Yeah.
financing part of things. So
Yep.
therefore, I'm kind of commingling them all together. But, so basically what we do is what I do, is I have this wonderful spreadsheet that I keep together, and I send this down to John, and I will send it to Christy, and I send it to Jim. And basically what it is I have 2 years prior, the current year, and 5 years ahead.
Yep.
So I always know what debt is falling off, what debt is coming on, so therefore, we can work with the treasurer collector when he's getting ready to borrow to know, okay, what year do we want to bring this permanent debt on? What year is the best time? Over the next couple years, on the water side of things, I'm going to be dropping off about $450,000 worth of debt. And on the sewer side of things, about $300,000 worth of debt.
Yep.
So when you're bringing forward, for instance, the $2.1 million borrow for the sewer portion, you know, when we go out to borrow, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $175,000 to $180,000 we'll need for principal and interest payment. We do decline debt, so that always goes down afterwards.
Yep.
But, so that's going to be able to be absorbed into the sewer rates without any
Big impact.
increase and any rate impact, because we're dropping debt off.
Yep.
And the water, unfortunately, is probably not going to be as easily absorbed. That's a big project, that's 6.8. And,
Yep.
I mean, I don't think anyone would expect that we would have $6.8 million in retained earnings to put towards a project like that.
Yep.
Speaking with Carl, he's telling me that that project is an aberration. I mean, he's not going to have a $6.8 million project next year or even 5 years down the road.
Okay.
He's going to continue to come back with the smaller projects to do pipes here and there, but not anything huge like this
Okay.
at this point anyway. And again, he's telling me that he's looking at probably a substantial completion date of somewhere in the end of 2020, which would mean the borrowing wouldn't impact until probably 2022.
Yep.
Because if you borrow, then your payments aren't due for a year out. So we're looking at 2022 again. I'm looking at probably losing about $450,000 in borrowing costs over the next 3 years, 4 years. So I'm thinking I'm probably looking at raising the water rates, not the sewer rates, but the water rates maybe 4% to cover that cost. But again, there's a lot of things that go into that. We have a huge project being built over on Westborough State Hospital that's going to be adding things in. New businesses come in. If businesses use a lot of water, they're going to pay into it. And that 4% rate increase might be a 2% rate increase. It might
Because
not
you
be
have
a
more
rate increase at all,
ratepayers.
because I have more ratepayers. So
Yeah.
it's a very soft number, but it's not, I'm not looking at you thinking, I'm going to be raising the rates 20% type
Great.
thing. So-
And Andrew has a question for you.
And I'm sorry, I missed, when would a foreseeable rate happen? 2 years, 3 years?
Probably 2022.
Okay, thank you.
And Paul? And then Jim?
This all makes me feel a lot more confident about how it's working. It's coming to us, or to me at least, as sort of these one-off projects, and it's okay, we have the money. And so we asked Carl, I think, for more of a plan, you know, like, because he said, well, we have 2 every year, whatever, the same thing you alluded to.
Right.
So that's what I'm kind of thinking, shouldn't there be more of this document? I mean, it's all documented to you and to Carl, but maybe not to us, the long-term, you know, picture, the big picture.
Right.
It sounds like it's all there, but
Yeah.
I don't think we're seeing it that way. We're seeing, it looks like an emergency, we got to take money out of here, hope there's enough.
Right.
It hasn't been certified yet, you know?
Yeah, well, no, it's, and it's certified
now, I know.
on,
Yeah.
it's certified now, but but it gets certified every year.
Yeah.
So I have to do my balance sheet, I have to send it to Department of Revenue, and then they have to ask a bunch of questions, and then they certify it. So it's not like it's something that doesn't happen every year, it happens every year, and it's not something like to be nervous about, we just get certified every year. You have to, you can't spend retained earnings or free cash until Department of Revenue has put their seal of approval on it. On June 30th, technically, all that money goes away. I mean, obviously it doesn't go anywhere, but the ability to use it, say for instance, we had a town meeting on July 2nd. You couldn't use free cash because there isn't any. Not until Department of Revenue takes my balance sheet as of June 30th, puts it through the ringer, and comes back with certified free cash, certified retained earnings for your 3 enterprise funds. So the reason why I don't want to say, gee, Jim, you could put that as a retained earnings is because there is no retained earnings. So to tell him to do that, even though I know we can, I just don't do it. I've never done it. I've been doing this for 30 years.
It just seems, it
Yeah.
often
You don't-
appears to be year to year as opposed to a
Yeah.
big plan, that's
Right.
all.
Yeah.
And there is a big plan, but it's a little bit
Mhm.
not transparent, I guess, to me.
Yeah.
It's nice to
Yeah.
know there is
I-
one, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
but I'd like to.
Like to see more of it.
Yeah.
I don't
No,
know.
I think Carl and I talked this week, and I think
Yeah.
that he understands that.
I think we mentioned that to him,
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
need to see
And he
where
said he
you're
was gonna
coming
send
from,
us
where
a
you are
list
and
of
where you're
some
going.
Right, and he
Yeah,
does
you
have
can
a
give
list
me
of things, and he knows what stations need to
Right.
be rehabbed. I mean, we have a lot of them, and apparently they last about 20 to 25 years, and, but this water, the water one, I believe, the way he mentioned it to me was that this was like a 50-year project type thing, so.
Jim Driscoll, did you have a question?
Yes, please.
Yep.
So your worksheet shows the borrowings and the life of the borrowings. Does it also show the principal payments that come due every year?
Oh, yeah.
Can we get a copy of that?
It's
If
only
you-
5 years out, but yeah.
But that's okay. Do you know from your worksheet what the principal payment is going to be in 2020?
For water?
Do you have it in total? A total for all the principal payments are going to be due in 2020?
Yeah, for water is $1,099,248.
Okay. So that's something we have to come up with in 2020 for principal payment.
Right,
Out of
but
the
you,
racetrack.
but you need to understand that in 19, it's 1,385,000. So 2020 is actually less than 19. So it's not an additional cost, it's the
this can be
same
less
cost.
burden.
Yeah, but it's still coming out of the, yeah, I got you. That's okay. I was just curious.
So
If
we
somebody's
won't
paying
experience-
$100
yeah.
today for a water bill, they're putting their $100 towards the cost in 19. It's the same cost in 20.
Yeah, okay.
So actually, we're dropping, we're losing debt in 2020. So it's about $285,000 less than what we're required to raise in 19.
Well, if debt is starting to come on,
Right.
the- well, it's starting to fall, but if we're starting to get additional debt for projects, wouldn't that number start going up?
No, because
So- So
Later.
we don't actually have any water or sewer debt that isn't in those numbers,
Okay.
except for these new projects.
Okay.
And it comes out of, no, and do we, to the extent that the debt is covered out of sewer and water retained earnings, it's the ratepayers that would have to come up with covering new debt if they needed to, not the
Right.
taxpayers, correct?
Oh, yes, no, the water and
Okay.
sewer enterprise funds are completely self-funded.
Okay, and just a question, when rates change, who has the authority to change the
John
rates?
Walden. I'm sorry,
No, how does it-
DPW director.
The DPW, and that's an administrative authority to do that.
Yes.
It doesn't come to town meeting, it
No.
doesn't come to us. It's
No.
his administrative
It's his
authority
administrative
to
authority.
determine the water rates and the sewer rates?
And the sewer rates, yeah,
Okay.
water and sewer rates.
Okay.
Is
So
there-
will getting the numbers help you, Jim?
Mhm.
Okay. If you could share them with him, he could, okay. Yes, Gary?
Is there a calculations for developing the water and sewer rates?
I calculate the water and sewer rates.
But I mean, what goes into, I mean, is there a formula? Do we have a formula for calculating those rates?
So the water and sewer rates were set up quite a few years ago in a tiered level,
Yeah,
and that tiered level was set up to create conservation, and those are pretty standard across the Commonwealth. In fact, the Water Rate Commission expects that you have a tiered rate, so that you basically, the more water you consume, the more you're gonna pay for that gallon of water, so that it recognizes that if someone conserves, they're gonna pay less.
People that only use a little bit of water
Right, they're just,
shouldn't pay
right, but when
an
we,
AstraZeneca value of
Exactly.
second water.
exactly,
you know.
because they're blowing by their meter,
Right,
whereas you as just, one or two people in your home, that's not happening.
right.
So, so those rates are staggered, but when we increase the rates, say we increase the rate by 2%, every one of those tiers
Tiers
goes up by the 2%. But 2% of $1 and 2% of $10, so they're feeling more because their bill is $100,000 instead of $80. So 2% of those two numbers obviously are vastly different.
All right.
Besides the debt, it's just the operations of the water and sewer that are part of the rate.
Yes, yes,
So it's basically the general operations plus the debt,
plus the debt, yes.
that then establishes what the rate, the water and sewer rates are gonna be, and then at a tiered level.
Correct. Hank?
Can you remind me?
I understand it.
But other towns are involved too, right? And so- Is it sewer that,
Yeah.
so that complicates it too, right?
Yeah, do you want to get into that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Just-
So
but
basically.
in a very broad way.
Okay, I'll try to be broad. So the sewer enterprise fund, this is why everyone kind of gets confused when we talk about estimated receipts and the sewer enterprise fund versus the sewer treatment plant. So the sewer treatment plant is owned by Westborough, Shrewsbury, and Hopkinton in a tri-party agreement. Our sewer, Westborough sewer, makes up about 38% of that. So, but because it's on our property and we basically own it, we own all of the financial transactions. So we have to appropriate the whole 4 million, even though Shrewsbury's going to send me a check for 57% of that, and Hopkinton's going to send me a check for 5% of it. We have to appropriate all the money, and the same with the debt. We've got $58 million worth of debt from the sewer treatment plant being upgraded several years ago. The town of Westborough has that debt on their financial records, but every year, Shrewsbury and Hopkinton send us the better part of we only pay 38%, and they send us the rest of it twice a year. They get billed, and they cover the cost of the principal, the interest, and the running of the wastewater treatment plant. So it's basically, we have to come up with the money, or we have to appropriate the money. We don't have to come up with the money. We have to appropriate the money so that they can spend it. But yet, Shrewsbury and Hopkinton are paying kind of the lion's share of it.
So when rates
So when your
change.
rates go up, it's only for your infrastructure in town, because your infrastructure does not come under the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant is just strictly that building, okay? So when you're paying on your sewer rates, you're paying for them to fix the sewer pipes in town. You're paying for them sewer pump stations that the town owns. Those sewer pump stations don't have anything to do with the wastewater treatment plant. So you're paying in your rate for all of that, plus in your rate, you're paying for 38% of the wastewater treatment plant. So if the wastewater treatment plant came forward and said, we need to borrow $10 million, you're really only on the hook for $3.8 million. Does that help?
And the service of that 3.8 million for us would come out of retained earnings and affect our rate, or could potentially affect our sewer rates, or?
So retained earnings is basically like free cash.
Yeah.
Okay, so we tend to appropriate out of retained earnings for capital projects.
Yep.
And we use the ratepayers to pay for the operation and maintenance costs and any debt. okay? So if you use retained earnings, you would never raise your rates because we already have collected the retained earnings.
Okay.
It's kind of like free cash doesn't affect the the raise and appropriate figure, because you're using free cash to cover the cost of something instead of raising taxes.
Okay.
Same thing with retained earnings on sewer, water, country club. You've already received the money, so it's not going to affect the ratepayers per se. I mean, it would, the only way it would affect the ratepayers is if you didn't have enough retained earnings and then you had to go back to them or something.
Okay.
But ordinarily, the retained earnings is not going to affect your ratepayers.
Okay. Yeah, and you have one more, Paul? Yep.
One last thing, so by us doing that debt and billing the other towns, does that help or hurt our credit rating?
No,
It's insignificant?
yeah, it's insignificant, yeah, no. No, because the bank knows that we have a tri-party agreement,
Devoted, yeah.
and they have, basically have to pay us, so. And they've never not paid us.
And the contracts are very long?
Yeah.
So other questions from the committee on 30, 31, and 32? I think to the extent that at town meeting, you can explain these are anticipated costs, they are manageable costs, and they're going to have fairly minimal impact on ratepayers or taxpayers, that's going to raise the confidence level. Even those numbers look really big, but if you can inspire confidence that they've been anticipated and will be handled without large impact, that's going to be helpful. And yes, Christy first.
I spoke with Chief Laurie this afternoon, and
Yep.
he expressed that this committee might have some concerns about Article 7.
Oh.
And I didn't know if you had any questions that
Sure.
I could answer.
We might
Yeah.
want one more. Did you have one more on the?
I understood 30 was going to be retained earnings, 31 and 32 are both borrow?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And let's go back to 7. Thank you for that. And number 7 is Police Department budget, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $228,767. Yes, we heard about this.
Did you have a question? If there's questions that I can answer.
Go, Jim Driscoll.
I did. I also talked to the chief this afternoon.
Okay.
And my concern, I know there is a need. I know there is a study coming out. I know that study's going to be ready before the March and will probably be on a warrant in March. My question to him was, should we just wait to find out what the survey really says and what the needs are really going to be?
Sure.
And, I mean, to the chief's point, he said, no, he needs them now. And I can understand that. But it appears to me that, here we are, we have a need now, we're going to have a need again in March. I just wonder if we should wait till March.
More?
No, I'm just, that's my concern.
Have you anticipated that question?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
I know you did.
So the staffing study that the police department is going to go through is obviously very similar to the staffing study that the fire department went through. In comparison, when Chief Purcell took over at the fire department, he did not have a deputy in the position that there is now. And that was a position that was created in advance of the staffing study that we did, that we did recently. Adding an assistant in the department has been something that we've been doing in several departments over the past few years. A few years ago, we had 2 assistant assessors that were at different levels. We combined that into one sort of stronger position with an administrative assistant position that we created. We've since added an assistant treasurer collector, assistant library director, and then also the deputy fire chief. So we fully anticipate that a study would, like the ADA improvements that we were talking about making at the different recreation areas in advance of the self-evaluation, we fully anticipate that a study is going to come out saying that this chief needs a strong number 2 in this position, especially with the staffing that he has and that we anticipate him needing. As far as adding the traffic position right now, you all drive in town. We know that this is, this is a big concern. We constantly are receiving complaints and concerns from citizens regarding the traffic in town, and so it's something that the chief is dedicated to address as quickly as possible. So.
Okay. And Ms. Bloomberg, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a couple parts. Does the study for the fire department seem to help them find a grant? So when we request the study for the police department, will there be a portion of helping them also potentially find grants to fund some of these positions or help us bring them on a little bit more slowly? Not in terms of the people, but in terms of the cost.
Sure. I fully anticipate that they would look at grant opportunities, and I know that the chief has gone after grant opportunities whenever they're available.
Awesome.
Another one?
He seemed kind of negative about that, though.
What?
He said, we're not going to get it.
Yeah, I know that he has expressed that it's the opportunity in the police department is different than the
Okay,
opportunity in the
that's
fire
what I guess I
department.
was wondering.
But it doesn't,
Awesome.
but I do foresee him, he is always looking at grant opportunities, so.
Well, you're our interim or acting town manager. Do you have a second? In other words, you went from assistant town manager to essentially town manager. Where's your support right now?
I'm also the assistant town manager. Certainly for those few months, it's a lot, but we have a really dedicated and supportive group of department heads. I mean, Leah is here. She's always there, very helpful to me. So I certainly wouldn't say that the town manager going forward, whoever the permanent town manager is, doesn't need an assistant. There's many, there's things that we're going to have to get done in the next few months, like the budget and negotiations and town meeting, that are going to be priority. But there'll be other things that we can do once we have a full staff.
And yes, Mr. Bradley, you had a question?
So one of the questions I'd ask the chief, and this might be beyond the scope of what you're prepared to speak to,
Sure.
was with regards to the actual counts of the kinds of things we respond to, numbers of types of crimes. I mean, that would be reflective of the kind of services that the police is delivering, and to see if there's any information about that over time. Is that something that there is credible or reasonable access to get to? Because the amount of those requests, I think, is one of the things that would bolster the need for more people.
Sure. So did he give his presentation with Lieutenant Minardi?
He did. We didn't get a specific breakdown. And, and I know that police work is sensitive.
Sure.
He did make a passing comment, we don't want to frighten the community.
Yes.
And sometimes, publicizing what is burdening the officers, it takes some sensitivity. But I think understanding better, not just the crime rate, but what all the service calls are about and whether shifts are completely covered because of the number and type of service calls might be some helpful data for him
Sure.
to bring forward.
Sure, and I'll mention that to him.
I'd also suggest, I've seen that data in previous versions of our annual book. So if we're choosing not to frighten people, we're making an odd choice by publishing these, but I don't know if they're always published. I suspect that they were indexed somewhere over time.
In the town report.
In the town report, perhaps? Yeah.
And then mutual aid, how often do we have to call a mutual aid and what's the cost of that?
Sure.
And Hank, yep.
Christie, really just a comment. I mean, the fire chief and the police chief, and more recently the police chief, has really made it clear that we're understaffed.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do a staffing study, it's just going to reinforce that we're not just understaffed, we're substantially understaffed. And my concern is that both in the fire department, the police department, and I believe in other departments that are not as clearly visible to me, we either have added in the last 18 months staffing, or we're going to have folks coming forward telling us we need to add, based on data and benchmarks and needs assessments, substantial staffing. I'm concerned that as we go through the next budget cycle, the 2020 budget cycle, we need to really think about how we're going to package that, because it feels to me like it's going to be tough to meet a 2 to 3% increase. And if we come forward with more than that, it's going to be a real fight.
Right.
Okay. Point taken. And Mr. Driscoll, yep.
Just a follow-up. I asked the chief what he thought the study was going to say. I couldn't get an answer out of him, okay? But I do believe that the town has grown such that I believe his number that, there's 20,000 of us that live here, but there's 58,000 that pass through here. And with that kind of growth in terms of numbers of people, and we always use the term community, and that's part of our community, because we want the growth, to have the commercial. We're talking about the west side of town now. That's going to be growth. That's going to mean needs in the fire department over what we're going to anticipate now, and that's the same with the police. I think we're at a boiling point, just to say, follow up what Hank said. It's going to be tough to come up with a 3% increase in the budget, not only for the town, but I believe for the school. You know, the community that the school services is a specific community. The fire and the police serve the whole community, and that's going to be a problem going forward.
So, yeah, and just to follow on that, it occurs to me as I've been listening to especially because the numbers, the flat staffing out of the fire department and the flat staffing out of the police department going back to the 80s and 90s is a little staggering. I've been coming to this town for 25 years, and it's a different town than it was 25 years ago. But what has come to me is I'd really like to get a feeling for how many of those service calls are residentially driven, how many of them are visitor driven, what's generating the new demands on our services, and should our revenues be tied to that? And I guess what's just occurred to me now with the new development coming online, our revenues should be going up. Are our revenues going up by 3 to 5% if our service demands are going up by 3 to 5%? And are we keeping those in balance? Or are we going to shift this burden onto the taxpayers? Those are the kind of things we have to know. I mean, it's our responsibility to deliver a balanced budget.
Sure.
Those are my comments. Well, and I'd say just the raw numbers don't always, in terms of quantities, don't always tell the story, because part of a commitment to a service is the speed of that service. So we could have 50% more fires and sustain it with the existing fire department if we also accepted the fact that sometimes it'll take us 30 minutes or an hour to get to a fire, which is totally unacceptable, obviously. So I think that there's other variables at play, but I think the root cause of the drivers are the instances that drive these concerns. And then we have to play around with what that impact on the service delivery is for those.
And what the impact is on the taxpayer, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Anything else on this one? All right, 30, yeah, did you have one more comment?
Well, should we make it? So at town meeting, it would be nice if the fire chief, the police chief, and the school department head could sort of, say they're not fighting, they support the town as a whole, and they support each other. Because what I don't want to see is pitting one against the other. We need all of them working, to our town's benefit.
Sure. I mean, you mean to have them speak and say that? I mean,
essentially.
Do you have department heads together gathering on a regular basis
we do.
anyway?
We have monthly
They must be
department
in
head meetings,
communication.
and I would say that those 3 department heads that you just mentioned collaborate regularly.
Right, and I think it might be beneficial for them to, help make it clear that, we have to come up with a lot of money for this, but that it's the idea that it's not one against the other, but we've got to sort of bring everybody. We need all of these services to be the town that we want to be.
Sure.
And there are 2 more. Did you have one more before we go? We have 2
I
more.
I would just certainly hope that the fire chief, the school superintendent, and the police chief are already working in that direction as part of for the community.
Well, I think they are, but I guess I'm trying to ask.
The point is taken. Do you understand the point that's being made?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
And I would agree that they are.
Okay, thank you. Articles 33 and 34. We had questions on the charter amendment, which was brought forward by the Board of Selectmen. We'll talk about that first. Someone had questions about the charter amendment. And this was a change in the appointing authority. From this being an administrative appointment to being an administrative appointment to these 3 boards with concurrence of the Board of Selectmen. Were there specific questions about this change?
I'm going to just make a point. when I reread this and I read the charter, I think I agree with Dexter Boyce that this is essentially already covered as long as there's good communication and the town administrator tells the selectmen who the appointed people are.
So and I read it differently, but I guess I'd like to hear what the significance of this change would be in town hall or to the department heads who have to get their committees staffed.
Just, speaking technically about what this article would do, it would really just the town manager would bring the appointment to the Board of Selectmen, and then they would vote on the concurrence. We do have some positions in town. The assistant town manager, for example, is voted on. There's a concurrence of the Board of Selectmen, even though the appointing authority is the town manager. And so these positions, which have historically been appointed solely by the town manager, would have to seek concurrence from the board.
Okay. Anyone else?
Some
Yes?
comments on it?
Yeah. We're kind of discussing now, so.
My opinion and my position on this particular amendment is we should not be, I'm opposed to it. We're disempowering, we're taking power, we're taking authority and accountability and away from the town manager, and we went through a major change in the town charter to put a town manager in place because we wanted somebody to run the town administratively. The town manager works for the Board of Selectmen. If the Board of Selectmen can't control their employee, they ought to be voted out of office. And we don't need changes to the town charter to help the Board of Selectmen control their employee. If they have specific issues about who should be serving on these committees, they have all the authority they need today as the employer of the town manager to exercise their authority and make suggestions and ensure that the town manager appropriately informs them and communicates with them effectively. And to start instilling this kind of thing in the town charter, we're going to end up changing the town charter every town meeting a little piece at a time, one job at a time. We hired a town manager. Let's let the town manager do their job and let the selectmen do their job.
Does anybody else have a comment or question on this?
Just in support of that too, I think this is a reaction to, I've gathered between the lines that this is a reaction to one situation rather than a systemic problem that needs to be addressed.
I mean, if we're weighing in here, pardon us while we discuss, because we have another one. I read this as the intention is to improve communication the way the charter is written now. A town manager is able to make an administrative appointment conveniently, and if 15 days passes and the Board of Selectmen don't see it, then the appointment takes place, which, and if with this change, but if there's not a meeting of the Board of Selectmen to get 3 of 5 votes, it's not a valid appointment until that time. If we ever got to a point where 3 of the Board of Selectmen did not agree with the town manager's appointment, I think we'd have a problem. But the way it's written now, the Board of Selectmen doesn't necessarily have to be aware if they don't have a town meeting between the time they appoint and 15 days that expires. So that's the balance. I mean, that's the balance that would change here. So does it create, Christie, in reality, an administrative burden or a workflow burden on the departments if this change happens? Or a logistical burden?
So, for the chief assessor, who's also on the Board of Assessors, and then the Board of Health Director, they work with those boards. So I suppose if there's a time lag in getting concurrence, then maybe you would have a quorum issue. However, the selectmen do meet twice a month, and I don't really see that
would it make a big difference? Yeah. Oh, yes, Beth.
I mean, I think the important clause is that the appointments under the subsection will take effect 15 days after the day of notice of the appointment is filed with the Board of Selectmen. So the Board of Selectmen have 2 weeks. They meet it twice a month.
Maybe.
So they should be hearing soon enough to say, oh, there's a problem. So I think, I have to be honest, I'm not in favor of this warrant article, even though I'm in favor of good communication. So I think that the current charter takes care of what this warrant article is trying to do, and that, hi, as town manager, please communicate well with our Board of Selectmen.
But the current charter does not demand that,
This is-
but it does not demand that an agenda item be put on the Board of Selectmen agenda to validate that.
No.
They're notified. It doesn't mean that a vote is required. It's different. So we'll all have to vote on what we think the intention of this article is and whether it's practical or useful for the town.
So,
They have to be notified, and then they can choose whether or not to.
Do you hear what I'm saying? It does not have to be on the agenda. With the change.
They can put it on the
concurrence-
agenda.
But required concurrence means they have to vote on it.
Yeah.
15 days' notice does not mean they have to vote on it. It's not
can.
concurrence.
But they
It can-
can.
So what's the difference?
The difference is they have to vote on it.
Right.
So anyway, go ahead.
Well,
Yeah.
but if they're-
Sean, yep.
So, and I guess one of the other things, and when Selectman Hashmi was here and spoke to us briefly about this, he, I guess, admitted that some of this was not very specific, like what concurrence meant and things of that nature, and he couldn't say specifically what that was. I don't know
What
if
does
you have.
concurrence mean? I mean, you can't determine concurrence unless your committee takes a vote to affirm. Isn't
so,
that right?
so that's how concurrence is read in the charter. We have several positions, like I said, that require concurrence of some sort of board or, and so it's the appointing authority brings the person forward, and then concurrence is a vote of that board that has to concur.
So talk to some selectmen and find out if they were aware when appointees came onto these boards or not, or if it just flew under radar.
But that's a mistake on the town manager's part, according to our charter.
So I just want to say, I didn't anticipate this question, so I don't have
Sorry,
the charter.
yeah,
It's fine,
yeah.
I don't have the charter in front of me, but I do think that some of that it does speak to building committees in two separate sections, and some of the selectmen felt that there was some ambiguity as to who, had the authority, and so this would clarify that.
Right, and it was brought to us by the Board of Selectmen. Any other questions on this? Or it's one selectman, I see. Actually, it's in the
It says it was supported 3-2.
3-2, okay. All right, anyone else have any other questions on this? All right, and the next one we had questions on was Article 34. The general bylaw residency requirement. Can you give us some background on where did you get to prepare for this one?
I can speak to it.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep.
So right now we have a bylaw that does not allow non-residents to serve on committees, which has been sort of brought to light over the last year and does create a problem for some boards and committees, the Economic Development Committee being one of them. So we have several town employees who serve on that committee who do not live in town. And so we received an opinion from town council that said that they could not serve on the Economic Development Committee because they don't live in town, they're not residents. But it's not just this committee. So the Capital Expenditure Planning Committee, one of the members of that is our treasurer collector. He does not live in town. He also serves on the trustee of the trust funds. Our board of assessors has the chief assessor on it who also does not live in town. So our diversity and inclusion committee has several positions on it with employees that do not live in town. So this sort of created an issue, and so this is to amend the bylaw so that it allows for committees to have employees on it that do not live in town. However, there's one committee, that the Local Emergency Planning Committee, that also has business owners or people who work at businesses in town who serve on the Local Emergency Planning Committee. And so that is chaired by the Deputy Fire Chief. And in speaking with him, obviously he feels that they have a lot of valuable input into his committee. And so that's why it just allows for non-residents in general, because it would be town employees and business owners or people who work in town.
So it does allow for business owners who work in town.
Right, if they're still appointing, so to be clear, there's still appointing authority for these boards and committees, so it would really have to be the composition of the committee would have to sort of call out a position.
Right.
Or, a business owner.
If I read it correctly, that for a non-resident to serve on the committee, either the town meeting or the Board of Selectmen or some documents, but really in practicality, 99% of the time, the Board of Selectmen would, make a motion and approve a motion to allow an individual to serve. 1% of the time, the town meeting would do that. So it's not as if we're going to allow anybody who wanders in off the street to
Right.
serve on a committee.
Right,
The Board of Selectmen has to vote in favor of that person or the town.
right. So it allows for a non-resident with a certain expertise or a certain role in the community to serve on a board or committee.
Okay. And Andrew?
So I have 2 points on this thought. One of them is, I don't see any requirement for a minimum percentage of residents being on towns. Or is that something that exists somewhere that I don't see? Because I can see it being detrimental if an entire committee didn't live or the vast majority didn't.
I'm not aware of anything that would,
And-
preclude that, but
Okay.
as far as the existing committees, like the ones that I spoke of, it's really one position and
Yep.
it's a town employee position.
No, I understand, but the obvious concern about a negative part would be that some of these committees just become diluted with folks who are not, residents of the town. But I think that gets to my second point, which is something like this, some reason to oppose this would be if we have concrete examples that non-town members are a detriment to the town. Now, again, I can imagine that an entire committee that's not town members will approach committee activity differently. But do we have any concrete reason to think that the odd non-resident member has been a detriment to these committees? Or is this just a procedural piece that the reason, is the reason to keep it all town members just a procedural piece?
So I'm not aware of when the bylaw was created,
Yeah.
sort of why. I don't think that we have an example of a non-resident being a detriment to a committee. I certainly
Yeah.
don't have that. Like I said, the majority of the issues with this bylaw come from town employees who do not live in town serving on a board or committee that offer a certain expertise to that board or committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes.
Isn't there, as just an alternative to this, appoint them as a non-voting member of the committee? I guess I'm concerned that, it sounds like the EDC was unable to meet quorum because of lack of residency, and that says to me that there's more non-residents than residents on the committee.
There are several positions and town employee positions that are on the Economic Development Committee, and that's, I think, really a result of those positions working so closely with economic development projects and permitting and things like that. So the town manager, the town manager, the DPW director, the chief assessor, the town planner, but then there are also members of the community who are on there who, work in the business in town and are able to provide their expertise.
Okay, so this is going to allow, I'm getting confused, I'm reading the last sentence, and it says, if a member is no longer a resident of the town, that individual shall be deemed to have vacated the position. Why is that language in this warrant article? Because I thought the point here is that we are going to change the residency requirement to show that if they have relevant expertise to the committee, they will be allowed here as a non-resident.
That's not what it says.
Right, so what it says is that, the first part of it says that you must be a resident of the town of Westborough.
Yeah?
And so that second part sort of speaks to that. So if you're on a committee or a board or committee as a resident of the town of Westborough, and then you move out of town,
All right,
you're no longer eligible. Unless the selectmen, town meeting, bylaws, charter,
Gotcha.
state law say that these positions or these type of people,
Yep,
maybe
non-residents
business owners,
may serve.
category, would be helpful to that committee.
okay, so that, yeah, so it says they can, and then it says how.
It is, yeah,
it's a
I
little
understand.
confusing, but I understand. The unless is very important. Okay. All right, any other questions on this one? That's 34, that's great. Yes, Ms. Williams, Ms. Talbot, thank you very much. This has been helpful, really helpful to our deliberations.
Thank you.
All right. Sure.
We're good. I would have brought it up if we wanted.
All right, I think we move now to continue warrant article review, and I think the easiest way to do that is to move to the Advisory Finance Committee warrant article worksheet that Gary emailed us today or handed out today, and I have a couple of extra copies if anybody needs another one. But we can go back to that and begin to work down the votes and see what we're ready to vote on and complete tonight. Do you have one?
I thought I had a yellow one as opposed to.
I've got a yellow one.
Thank you.
If anybody else
I'll
wants a
take the
yellow
gray
one.
one back. I'll let you have mine.
I have one more.
Okay.
Anybody has one?
Do you want to?
Okay.
Works for me.
All right, let's take a look at the chart. We just heard about
Number one.
warrant article number 1, non-union compensation. Are we ready to vote?
I move the town, the finance committee recommend the town vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $38,000 for the purposes as expressed in Article 1 of the warrant.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? That's 900. All right, next we move, we have not heard from Youth and Family Services, so I assume we are not ready to vote on that. We'll hear from them on the 9th. That's Article 10. Then we move down to Article number 21.
As an observation,
Yes.
Article 7 is indicated as having been voted on, but we haven't.
Okay,
So, but this is the one that's the police chief. I don't know
Yeah.
if we feel we're ready to.
well, we did not
Yes.
vote on that one. Okay. So, yes, we would need, do you know enough to vote on police chief, or do you want to discuss that now? Or the police department budget?
This is the two positions.
This
Yeah.
is, yep.
I think
And
we've
it's-
discussed it.
Yeah,
Pardon?
I move the finance committee recommend the town vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $228,000, $267,767 for the purpose as indicated in this article.
Do we have a second? And I see that as 297,562 in very
Oh,
tiny
sorry,
print.
Yeah, we needed.
Is that
I amended
correct?
to-
Okay,
Let me find that motion.
okay.
Darn motions. Yep, 228,
I've got two-
228,767 is the correct number.
So the chart says that we have in front of us says 297.
There's
There's
two
wages
parts
and
to this.
expenses.
Oh,
There's two parts, there's $228,767 for salary and wages, and $68,795 for expenses.
so those two are,
So those two
combined into-
tally up to 297.
Let's amend the motion to include and department, the police department salaries account of $68,795,000.
Expenses.
I'm sorry, yeah.
are you looking
Why
back
don't we- why don't
into
we
the
just-
article?
Why don't we just say, we recommend that the town
Yeah.
raise and appropriate $297,562 for the purposes of this article.
That's.
Second.
Is that good? Okay. Does anyone want to discuss this any further? All right, if you're ready to vote, all in favor? That is, do we have nine, eight? Eight. All opposed, 1 and 0. 8, 1 and 0. Thanks for pointing that out, Andrew.
Sure.
And then, now we move on to Youth and Family Services, which we're going to wait until next week. And I've got the next one is 21. This is to amend the Country Club FY19 budget. Do we have a motion? 21, is that right? Do we have it?
Yes.
Okay, someone looking, I'm looking at the chart if someone's looking at the warrant. Are we ready to vote?
You just have to get there.
Okay.
It's page 8.
Article number 21, it's page 8 of the current warrant.
I will move that we recommend recommend that the town increase the annual budget of the country club operating committee by $44,300. And that we transfer and appropriate from the country club retained earnings the sum of $64,300.
20,000. So the total is 64,300.
No,
Yeah, he's got it right.
No.
no, he had it right.
Is it?
No. We're raising, we're first of all approving to increase the expense budget.
Got it.
Okay, we're not,
Thank you.
we're not, that doesn't really involve any cash, I guess you would say, okay? So that's the first part of it, making the total expense budget $466 from what it was originally. And then we are transferring and appropriating from the country club retained earnings the sum of $64,300 for the purpose of the article to fund that raise.
I apologize that I misspoke.
Second?
Okay.
Any further discussion? Yes, Paul?
I can't recall, but does anyone recall why we passed over this earlier this week?
Let me
'Cause
have
I think we must have, based on where it is. Was there an outstanding issue?
Or did we just skip it?
I think we just,
I think maybe we skipped over,
I
maybe
don't
I
have any-
missed
I
it.
can't remember it either, okay.
Yeah, I might have just missed that when we were going through this the other night. All right, if there's no further questions now,
I guess I do have, I mean, one of the things they had, the country club had come forward with it, and this is probably a Christie question, but maybe one of you know the answer, had come forward to us with a plan that involved their changing their structure, and there was a decision not, and possibly going under the rec department. And this is a change to that plan to say, keep operating as you're operating, which it was my understanding was a losing money proposition. And I guess I don't quite know.
that's correct. With the country club, country club, a committee that was formed by the Board of Selectmen to investigate options for the future of the country club, went to the Board of Selectmen and made a recommendation. And the Board of Selectmen chose not to accept the recommendation. They chose to send the report from that committee they've chartered to the country club operating committee to act upon it as they saw fit. And that's what's going on with it. So basically, the selectmen said, keep doing what you're doing, but take some of the good ideas that came from this committee and implement them. But that was true, again, the Board of Selectmen,
Okay. So the Board of Selectmen had seen the proposal, chosen not to act on it in its
Yes.
entirety.
that's correct.
Okay.
other questions or clarifications, Andrew?
Just an observation that I'm very unclear as to how they plan on measuring the use of that, the value of that $20,000 in marketing, given that they don't have a lot of capacity, that they're just talking about mix. So I expect I'll be asking those sorts of questions going forward, but I'm in favor of this article as it is, just to give them a chance.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, are people ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor of the article? Okay, that is 900. All right, next is number 23, and that's the property appraisal that we heard from Mark Silverberg from the perspective of the Open Space Committee. Do we have a motion on that?
I'll move that we recommend the town vote to appropriate and transfer from free cash the sum of $25,000 for the purpose of this article.
Second.
Any discussion? Do we still have any questions or discussion on this one? All right, all in favor? All right, that's 900. All right, the 25 and 26 go together, but we have to take separate votes on them. So the first one is to rescind excess debt. These are both from the Municipal Building Committee. Do we have a motion on, first of all, Article 25?
I'll move that we recommend the town so vote.
And
Second.
did you have a question, Mr. McGoldrick? Okay. You're seconding. Okay, very good. And any other discussion? All right, all in favor? That's 900. And Article 26 is connected to 25, and this is the
Not really.
Forbes building debt increase. Do we have a motion?
I will move that we, committee recommend that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $500,000 for the purposes of this article.
Second?
Second.
All right, and any discussion on this or outstanding questions? All in favor? That's a 900. Next, the town sewer system. That's Article number 30. We heard quite a lot about this tonight from our finance director. And do we have a motion for this article, number 30?
I move that the town vote to appropriate $1.2 million to pay additional costs for the purpose of this article, in addition to the $2 million previously appropriated.
We need to,
No, it needs to be,
Need
needs to be,
retained
we need to amend that
needs
to
to be
say
a
from
raise,
sewer retained
transfer from,
I'm
earnings.
sorry.
Yep.
transfer from available funds.
Appropriate from sewer retained earnings is the,
Yeah, okay. I recommend that the town vote to appropriate $1.2 million
From retained earnings.
from sewer retained earnings for the purpose of this article.
Okay, do we have a second on that one?
second.
All right, any outstanding questions or concerns? All in favor? 900. Then, Article 31, and this one is the town sewer system. Do we have a motion for this article?
I recommend that the town vote to borrow $2,100,000 from sewer. Is this one from, this one I'm trying to look to see if it says sewer retained earnings somewhere, and it doesn't seem to, for the purpose of this article. So just to borrow.
Right.
Second.
Any further discussion or questions? Anybody? Okay. All right, can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
We're going to borrow it?
It's a
Does
borrow.
that mean that the payment on the borrow comes from the retained earnings
It comes from the operations of the enterprise fund,
of the enterprise fund, not on
Comes out of the
the...
enterprise fund, which
Okay.
which is,
basic,
paid for by the,
Right.
by the rates.
So the source, yep.
In the event the rates raised
Mhm.
could not pay for the debt, then the retained earnings could be utilized to pay for that debt. So it all comes out of the enterprise.
The enterprise fund, which is there.
Even though I didn't put the enterprise fund in motion?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean,
Yeah.
we're borrowing money, for the sewer enterprise fund,
Okay.
you know, or.
And that's where it's going to come
And
from.
that's
There
where
is a
it's gonna-
source available to the community
Yeah.
for that. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Thank you for that clarification. All in favor? That's 900. All right, Article number 32, Town Water System. Do we have a motion?
Okay. I recommend that the town vote to borrow $6,800,000 for the purposes of this article, and this is a genuine borrow, no mention of anything, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay, any other, do we have a second?
second.
Anybody want to clarify again? Yes, Hank?
No, I'm good. I was.
You're ready to
second
vote? All right, all those in favor?
He's pre-voted.
Okay,
Vote early, vote often.
we got a 9,
We have a 10-0.
we got a 900.
Thanks, Hank. 900, right, yeah.
All right, we have a charter amendment, which came from the Board of Selectmen, and I heard, or learned tonight that that was a 3-2 vote in the Board of Selectmen. Do we have a motion on this article?
I'd like discussion on it.
Well, we can do a first and a second.
I
Are we ready to
move the-
vote tonight?
I move the finance committee recommend to the town, that the town vote
Pass
to
over?
defeat this article.
Is anybody going to second that?
Yeah.
All right, I need some discussion. I see no reason to defeat this article, and I would vote to support it. I think The selectmen came making a good case that this change involves the Board of Selectmen in the decision-making in a very affirmative way to staff these committees. I don't think I sense the question wouldn't have been raised unless these appointments have been made without the Board of Selectmen engaging in it. I don't know, I can support it. I thought a good case was made.
Yeah, my concern is, I'm somewhat concerned with the particular article, but my main concern is, the last time we changed the charter, we put together a charter commission. They spent 2 years studying, reported back to the selectmen, had public meetings, took input from a number of sources. And they did all of this before they changed the charter. I believe it's an inappropriate precedent to allow a single charter element to be changed without a process that involves the community, involves, and is really deliberative in terms of understanding, we shouldn't be doing point changes to the charter.
Okay.
We have
Yes.
in the past.
We haven't done point changes to the charter. We've done bylaw changes on a point basis, but not charter changes. Charter changes have always been done as a result of a deliberative process, and they only occur on rare occasion after due deliberation and due diligence.
Okay. All right, so did you have an example, if you're going to say that it has?
I'm pretty sure I just remember being in town meeting and dealing with one, but I will say that I don't see this as adding if communication is working between town manager and the selectmen, this isn't adding enough to make it, to justify the change.
Okay.
I think that's really the issue.
It changes it from maybe the Board of Selectmen will hear about it to the Board of Selectmen will hear about it, and
The town charter says that they should.
the
should
town
hear
charter
from
says that they can be notified, means it can be slipped into any communication you want to, and
Yes.
if a Board of Selectmen is not alertive enough to catch it in 15 days, it just goes through. It is just less accountability to the selectmen. So, anyway, that's my point of view. But, Andrew, what do you?
Sure. I view the impact of this change as benign at worst and benevolent at best, because it puts some of the voting authority in a guaranteed way in the hands of the elected representatives, which is always, in my mind, a positive thing. And I would agree that, to Hank's point, that it's dangerous to always make a case or to allow rampant, point changes of these sorts of things. And that's something we should be guarded about. But we also make changes to, large plans for schools where we draw envelopes and we discover a boiler room is 3 feet too small, and we make those changes because it seems like the right thing to do. And I think that if anything, this comes up as a net benefit, so I'm okay supporting that.
Yeah.
On that specific point, I'd say it's not a net benefit to politicize routine appointments when they can be stopped.
Yep, Terry,
I
yep,
just don't see any need for it. I think it adds nothing.
yeah, and Sean?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that I have an issue with the Board of Selectmen recommending a change that increases the power of the Board of Selectmen.
Well said.
Interesting point. Anyone else? Yeah.
My opinion is that we don't need to change the charter. We have a charter review committee currently in place to ongoing review of the charter, and that's really where it lies.
Okay.
I think the reading the charter, I think the privilege already exists for the Board of Selectmen to take exception to an appointment that may be made by the town manager. I think it already exists in the charter, and if the charter review committee, in conjunction with the work it's doing anyhow, decide that it finds loopholes or deficiencies in the charter that didn't get addressed in the last charter review, that's where it should take place. And kind of along the same lines as Sean's point, that the Board of Selectmen shouldn't necessarily be administrating their power for themselves.
Okay. Any other points?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
We talk about the sanctity of the charter. What is the responsibility for the selectmen in terms of holding the charter in that same reverence? I mean, should they not be exercising the known outlet already?
The
or-
selectmen actually cannot change the charter. If you read the
The town
article
meeting has
carefully,
to,
what we're
yeah.
doing is we're empowering the selectmen to go to the legislature with, and ask for a charter change. The charter is granted to us by the legislature of the state of Massachusetts. It's not granted to us by ourselves.
The selectmen enforce?
Is that written in here that this is an act of the legislature? Yes.
Yeah.
Up at the
Authorized
top,
Board of
second
Selectmen,
line,
petition
second
to
line.
general court.
Got it.
That's
Got
That's
it?
the official name for the legislature.
I get you.
The state
I
one.
get you. All right, any other questions or discussion? So the motion that is on the table is a recommendation that town meeting pass over this article.
Defeat it. We don't pass over anymore.
All right,
Apologize
so
for
why
being
aren't we
specific.
just, I mean, the vote is whether we support the article or don't support it then.
Well, it's more clear, our recommendation to the voters is more clear that we're saying they should defeat the article.
So the motion is that we're, rather
We
than,
recommend that the town meeting defeat the article. We've done this in the past.
Yeah, because that puts our vote, if we choose to defeat the article, that puts our vote as a 9-0 saying, or 7-2 or whatever it is. It puts it in the group saying, yes, do this. That number comes first. Whereas if we vote for the article and vote against it, which is the other way, then we look like we're 2-7. And for some reason, that's considered confusing.
not to me.
I understand.
The article is there, and you either accept, you recommend to the meeting that they accept the article, or you recommend to the meeting that they defeat the article. But this is the motion that's on the floor now. Mr. Roush's motion is on the floor now, and, you know, there's a lot we could do parliamentary, but I expect we should vote on it. Okay, so the motion on the floor is that the AFC vote to defeat this?
Recommend.
Recommend
the town meeting defeat
that the
the
town
article.
meeting defeat the
Of
article.
voters.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7, all opposed. 7-2-0.
But knowing that that's defeat as opposed to pass.
So it wouldn't, I mean, I think 270 would say that, but whatever,
On
the ward,
On the parliamentary issue,
yeah.
John Arnold, the moderator,
Mhm.
has always been a stickler about voting in the affirmative. In other words, to present the motion for the affirmative vote. In other words, you know, so we voted to defeat, but it's an affirmative vote of
The majority of
of
us.
7-2-0
Right.
to, you know, to make it, I mean, John's the parliamentary, you know, the parliamentary authority, and that's the way we
So
have.
frame it in the affirmative, okay,
Yeah,
that,
to
and
frame it,
voting to divert
To
is
always
a,
frame
Yeah.
to always frame the question or the motion in the affirmative.
So that the majority is voting for the motion is the effective,
ah.
Yeah.
does that,
Yeah.
If that's clear to people, I mean, that's fine, I understand.
Yeah.
Point taken, thank you. Alrighty, the next one is the general bylaw residency requirement, and I think we learned a bit tonight about what that's about. Do we have a motion for that article?
I move the Finance Committee recommend the town so vote.
Second.
Okay,
I'd
and
like discussion.
you have some, Beth, you have some discussion, okay? It's 9:35, but go
Okay.
ahead, yep.
I am not sure I have bought into understanding and liking, this bylaw. Is it also a spur-of-the-moment bylaw? Is this a well-thought-out, well-written? I think I liked Andrew's point about, what portion of a committee can be from out of town. I want to make sure that we're keeping the town, controlling the town.
So you know what the context is, right? What this does is put into the bylaws the practice of the town as we've always practiced it until we dissolved committees that could no longer function because someone found this technicality in the law.
I understand that.
All right.
Is it also because more town employees are living out of town than used to?
Is that right?
Yep.
Could be, I mean.
And it's also because our town manager can live out of town and we need him on some committees, or her.
And the question is, I guess my concern is, should these be voting positions, non-voting positions? I mean, I think there's more depth to this, give it to the Charter Review Committee, give it,
But meanwhile,
This is
but
not the office of
I know
the
the
Charter
Charter
Review
Review,
Committee.
But
I'm
no,
not sure
and
who-
meanwhile, you immobilize some standing committees that can no longer function since this technicality was raised that the law that we have on the books was against present practice. There are certain committees that can no longer meet.
But I
Committees
do
don't have
think
any
too, though,
administrative authority. They don't have any executive authority.
Right.
but they're voting, I mean, I don't know. I feel like these people should be on these committees, but maybe not voting. I don't know. It's,
That's why I'm not ready for this.
Whether they vote or not is a no-op. I mean, the committees have no executive authority.
yeah, it's just opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, and Andrew, you have one, and then I have a thought, that triggered a thought. Thanks, yep.
I would agree that I don't think this is the best written article, because I would love to see a minimum, but I also recognize that there's an actual need to keep the town business going that these people support, and I'd rather allow that to happen and then hope for a remedy going forward, rather than keep everything stopped.
So, and what occurs to me from what you said, and it was just a passing comment that Jim Malloy made before he left, is if we allowed, a highly influential business personality to be on one of the committees, but they don't live in Westborough, there's a potential for outside influence by a non-resident on one of the committees. That would be the biggest risk I could see. In practice, we had some committees that really benefited from having someone from the business community who doesn't live here participate. So I think that's what we're managing there. Was I clear? Okay.
I think more input in terms of, what are we have a lot of committees in town, but like this committee has to be all town residents.
Yeah, I'm really vexed by this, but didn't we get, she gave us an example tonight of what?
Business.
Economic development.
Economic development is the clearest example because they're the ones who were hit by this. But she gave another.
Emergency planning.
Emergency planning. You have other folks who don't live here but who are involved in work in the community. And police and fire they don't have to live here, but they can contribute to that.
Well, they're oftentimes required to be on some of the committees, because of their
Expertise.
Their expertise and their input that, that are necessary.
I get what's in play here is introducing outsized influence by non-residents on the committees that impact the decisions we make is the question, but also benefiting from the expertise that can enhance the functioning of the committees from someone who doesn't live here is the upside.
I think because it's written, unless appointed by, town meeting, the bylaws, town charter, I think that safeguards it from getting out of hand.
Okay? That's a good point.
So I don't know, that's enough for me, I guess, but.
Anyone else want to discuss? Do we have a motion on the table, or are we discussing? We're discussing.
I think we had a motion.
We have a motion.
We do?
Yeah.
That the town
Okay.
so vote?
So this is.
So vote,
yeah.
okay. All right. Ready to vote? All in favor of this article? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, looks like 8 opposed?
I just don't want it to be unanimous. I
Okay.
want it to come for discussion.
Okay, that's 8, 1, 0. Uh, 36. To amend the zoning bylaw, and we just heard about this tonight, we learned that there is a proposal from the planning board to change zoning to allow 6-story development on the west side of town. Do we hear a motion? Do we want to vote tonight? Sure. Or do we want to get more information?
I think I would like to hear some more,
I can- yeah.
information.
You know
and
what, and
and
Mark-
have some more time to consider
Yeah,
the impact
right.
of this article,
And I
of this
think- Right.
zoning change going forward.
And we also were promised some information on the prospective
commercial
benefits.
potential, yeah.
And, yeah. So we're going to wait until Monday to see, or Tuesday to see if we hear more, or wait till town meeting if we don't hear more before town meeting?
Well, we can, we
Okay,
don't have to.
because we could listen to floor debate and then take our vote in, right?
Yes, we could. We could
Okay.
defer, we could defer we can defer a recommendation to town meeting floor.
All right. Okay, then let's, am I getting a sense it's okay to wait on this one? Anybody feel strongly?
Yes.
All right. Then let's look at 37.
I will move that we recommend the town so vote.
Second?
Any questions or concerns on this one? All in favor? Are you ready? Yep. That's a 900.
That was 37.
Yep. Oh, that was 37, you're right.
Yeah, because you have to skip a line on that one.
Yep. Thank you. And then number 38 was a zoning bylaw amendment to section 26. This was the
school.
Right, it was the school building.
I recommend the
adjustment.
town so vote.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? 900. And, let me see. I've got
And 40 also.
40 is ready. That's school bidding. This is the zoning setback at Fales Elementary School. Do we have a recommendation for Article 40?
Recommend the town so vote.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Okay, 900. And we're not going to vote on the non-binding question, right?
So, if I had a thought about that, or if you're
Do
calling
you
for
want,
questions.
does anybody want to discuss the non-binding question?
Sure.
Well,
Is it appropriate?
I think it's inappropriate for the finance committee to address a non-binding question with a recommendation.
Okay.
It's not our charter to do that.
So it was really a courtesy to let us know this was going to be
That's fine, yeah.
in the town meeting?
It's not on the warrant. Our job is to respond to the warrant.
No, our job is to make recommendations to the town.
Our job is to make recommendations on the warrant.
Well, I would second Hank's with the additional input that if we were receiving information or details that would not be readily available to the town hall, that we would consider, if there was something we were privy to, it would benefit the town for us to be able to share our wisdom, but I don't think that's the case here.
So, and will there be discussion of the town meeting on the town meeting floor?
No.
My understanding is that there will not be.
Which is why I think we are privileged to the information, for example, that 40B is going to disappear unless they make a point of saying that.
But
I mean, not 40B, but specific.
40, again,
I would agree entirely that this is a valuable topic to discuss in greater detail, but I think that it needs to be addressed to a specific need. And we've had those needs presented before, and I think those needs will come again, regardless of this yes or no vote. So,
Yeah. I mean, we don't have the authority to recommend that they not do this. I mean, they've already engaged the town moderator it's his privilege to decide whether to put a non-binding question before town meeting, and it was a courtesy that we be informed that this is happening. So what I'm hearing is we don't have much of a role. We've been informed, which I think was a courtesy. I don't know if we have a role at this point. And we don't have you know what? We can ask John Arnold, the town moderator, and we still have another meeting, if anybody wants to ask if it's appropriate to have more discussion in committee. Okay. All right. Thank you. We're almost there. Let me see what else we have here tonight.
Do you want to recap the ones that are left? just so people-
All right, if I can find them. What we have left Article number 10 on the Youth and Family Services budget. We have left, anybody help me out here? Number 36.
10 and 36.
10 and 36 remain. Okay.
Is 41 gone, or do I have an old copy?
It is gone. Did you pick the one that is final has?
Okay, I don't know what I
41
call
still
it.
exists, but we already
41 we
approved it.
voted on is HVAC.
That's
Oh,
the
we did vote on,
DPW,
sorry. Thank you.
heating system.
Okay, yeah, the HVAC. So we really got them all? I thought,
Except for those two.
Yeah.
all right, I thought we had one other
There's one that's
left.
a double line, but it's a double line in the way it's written on the chart.
So the Council on Aging budget is, okay, all right. My guys get a little googly looking at the small print on the chart, but that's what the wisdom of the committee said. We have 10 and 36 remaining to approve. All righty, that's it for warrant article review now. We can take a peek at future draft agendas. On Tuesday night, we have Youth and Family Services to come in, and we'll meet the new Youth and Family Services Director. And at the end of that meeting, we have to have completed all of our votes, and I've given you a quick review of our deadlines for producing the R&R booklet. I could use some help proofing that final document next week when it comes back.
Sure.
Okay, Sean, you will,
Yes.
and we'll share it with the committee, but if you could work with me to make sure we've done a fine comb by the end of the day, I appreciate that.
Also, point of observation, it's
Yep.
in the firehouse.
It's in the firehouse,
Very
yes.
nearly went there
So, and
tonight, so.
and Youth and Family Services was informed of that today. So we will be meeting across the street at the firehouse.
And Selectmen will be
All
here.
right. Gary, did you want to begin to, I mean, this would be a good thing for us to discuss the revenue and financial and expenditures. This is a piece that goes into the R&R booklet.
Right.
And we could discuss that tonight, or we could just plan to be spending some time on it on
We can do it,
Tuesday
we
night.
can do it on Tuesday night. I distributed it to everybody.
Okay,
I mean, I basically met with Leah this week. These are the, you know, the reports that the financial reports that we present to the town
okay.
at each one of the town meetings and everything. And so I met with Leah, then went over the numbers with her, and they all seem to be,
Okay,
they all seem to be in place.
I would just comment, you look at the numbers,
yeah.
the valuation, the average single-family tax bill is increasing at a percentage rate that's higher than the valuation's increasing.
So this is,
And that's we need to
Right.
express some concern about that.
so this is a little piece I would like to discuss on Tuesday night as
Right.
well.
Well, there is,
Yeah.
you're right, Hank. The property valuations went up by basically 7%, 7.2%, and taxes are going up by 8.
Taxes are up
By
by
eight.
almost
So-
9%.
Almost 9,
So-
or are going up by almost 9.
Almost 9%. And
Yeah.
I have to go look at what happened at annual town meeting. The same thing happened at annual town meeting last year, this past spring. I mean,
Yeah,
our property valuations, our spending went up faster than our valuations went up.
and
So we need to understand it,
and does
we can't
value-
keep doing this.
but does the valuation speak to all of our revenues? So when we talk about
Basically, yeah.
valuation, that means commercial
Valuation
and,
is a percentage of
All right.
the revenue is a percentage of the valuation.
so let's discuss this a little more on Tuesday night, if you don't mind, because those are, what exactly are the impact? And if our spending is getting ahead of our revenues, it's not, we should be paying attention to it now. So if we can talk about that on
Sure.
Tuesday, that would be great.
Just
So anything else, Gary, to highlight for us to look at?
These are the three reports that are gonna appear in the book.
Okay,
And that, they're basically the standard revenue and expense report, the free cash and retained earnings transfers and balances in our reserve funds.
Yep.
And then, of course, the actual versus budget report on last year,
okay.
which we do at every fall town meeting.
Okay, and then the last missing piece is the message from the advisory committee, which is the responsibility of the chair. And Gary has been kind enough to draft one and get some feedback and condense one. But I have shared that with the rest of you, and we'll be finishing that. It's in your email box. It went out later this afternoon. If you have any comments on the one-page draft, I'm going to be working on it over the long weekend, and we'll come back on Tuesday night with a version I recommend for the final version. We'll give you one last look before that message from the AFC is put in the R&R book. And that's all I have.
Can I just ask, I mean, obviously, because our goal is to present a balanced budget to the town, and if we keep raising taxes more than the values of houses go up, the question is there a place that we can think of that's straightforward to not spend money?
Or to raise
or to
revenues.
raise revenues.
Yes,
Yeah.
those are good questions. And that's a little bit what I'm expecting the town manager and the finance director and the town treasurer and the board of selectmen, and we think about collectively as a community, we should all be keeping an eye on that. Okay. Any other liaison reports or other concerns or comments? All right, thank you. It's a late night.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Yes. Thank you for staying for 3 hours.